All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Local Planning Committee meeting. This is meeting number 5, February 19, 2020. Just want to say thank you to everyone who is here, and thank you to all of the members of the Local Planning Committee for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here today and help make City and Peekskill one of the greatest cities on earth. We're extremely busy now, Marcia.
Oh my God.
I think more busy than ever the last couple of days, but I'm very excited to be here with this team. To the consultants, you guys have been fantastic to work with, so thank you for all of your hard work. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty of the process. I'm looking forward to seeing what we do next. So with that being said, we're going to turn it right over to Simon and the rest of the committee so we can get started. Thank you, sir.
Welcome, everyone. My little Spanish introduction. Esta es la quinta reunión del LPC. Tenemos copias de la presentación disponibles en español. Y Cristina ahora les va a dar más detalles.
Buenas noches. Si hay alguien aquí que necesita ayuda, asistencia para entender la presentación de hoy, yo estoy aquí para ayudarles. Y también tenemos copias de la presentación en español en la mesa de la entrada. Gracias.
Great, thank you. So we have a full meeting tonight. We have a lot to get through and some decisions to make, I think. So we're going to dive right in. So first we'll go through our few introductory slides. We'll give you a sense of where we are in the process, give you a quick update on community engagement, and then we're going to go through both the new projects that have been submitted as far as the deadline for open call, which was last Friday, and also then we're going to go through all of the projects that have been on the list all along, and we're going to kind of go through the details on that and give you a sense of what's changed. I think at this point everybody knows who's on the committee. Committee, you know yourselves. So we can move on. Hopefully you know us by now. Anybody from the state other than Dave and Elizabeth? Okay. We're always happy to have them. So tonight, our main agenda items, our main objectives, we're going to review the new project ideas, as I said. We're going to update all the existing projects. And then at the end, we're going to hopefully trim some of the projects because as you'll see, we are high on the numbers, which is actually a good place to be. It means you've got a fair amount of good projects to think about, and you're in the position of choosing which are the best. So in our minds, it's a better place to be than if you were short and having to come up with new projects. So with that being said, we're going to go through our conflict of interest that we always have to state at the beginning of these meetings. Just as a reminder, I think you all know this at this point, but you have an obligation to disclose any potential conflicts whenever they arise, whenever you become aware of them. And I think we've been keeping track of who has conflicts. Do you have this list in your head?
So I'll go through the ones that we know about. If there's any that we missed, please speak up. Ms. Jeanette with the HRH project, thank you. Bill Balter with Kylie Center project. Thank you for our Peekskill, that's right. Bill Balter also. Chuck, did you have one?
Peekskill Arts.
Peekskill Arts as well. And then Bree Pettis, of course, and then Brian, I think you turned one in for the farmers market as well. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Energy as well. Okay, great. Anyone else? Thank you.
So during our discussion, if at any point you realize you have a conflict, you can just let us know then and there, and we'll add that to the list. Okay. So where are we? We're getting down to the end here. We have a month or so. This is our second to last LPC meeting, but we do have one more public workshop next week on February 26th, and we will have a public survey that's going to be going live this week on Friday, actually. And it'll be online, and we'll also have copies available, hard copies, at the library and at City Hall.
When is our next meeting here?
It's March 18th is our final LPC meeting in this room. And at that final meeting, actually that's a good segue to this slide, just to give you a sense of what's going to, did I go back? Sorry. No? Got it. Okay, thank you. What's it going to look like in the final month to 6 weeks of this project? So tonight is our 5th meeting. We have the workshop next week. In early March, first 10 days most likely, We will be sharing a full draft plan with you. That will be very much a draft, but you'll get a sense of what the whole plan put together looks like. Then we have our March 18th LPC meeting, which is our last meeting. At that meeting, you'll be voting on the full slate of projects. So we'll go through how we'll get there, but that's an outcome of that meeting. We'll have a vote basically up or down on the entire slate, and then that'll be what goes into the plan and gets submitted to the state. After March 18th, then we spend the next 2 weeks frenetically putting the final plan together, putting all the polishing touches on it, cleaning up the graphics, making it actually look really good. And then March 31 is our drop dead deadline date when we submit it to the state. So that's kind of what it looks like. So these next 2 meetings with you all are very important, and our workshop next week and the survey, those are all very important components to helping refine the list of projects and then getting us down to the final product. Okay. Just a quick update on community engagement since we last met. We had our second public workshop was last month, end of January, at the fire station. It was great. We had a really good turnout. We got a lot of really great information, good feedback on specifics of especially public projects. So it was very helpful for our team. And then just last week, I guess it was, a couple weeks ago actually, the 6th, Christina and I met in this room. Actually, it was the Business Owners Roundtable, and Brian was there as well. And it was really just intended to get everybody who owns a business downtown in the same room talking about issues that are common to them. Issues that perhaps could be addressed with DRI projects, or even just longer term things that the city should be aware of. That was really helpful to get a sense of concerns that people have. There were a lot of questions about the DRI process too, details on the implementation side of it. There were some people who were interested in the downtown fund that we talked about. They could see the value of that for their business. So it was a good turnout. I would say about 40, 50 people or so came that night. Christine did a wonderful job on the translation. It was English to Spanish, everything. So it was a good meeting, very productive. And coming up, we have 2 big things. Next week, as I said, is the last public workshop, the 3rd one. It's back at the firehouse at 7 o'clock on the 26th. We have flyers at the table if you'd like to take some and share them with your friends and social networks. And then we also have the public survey, which will be open from this Friday through March 13th. That's really valuable to us to not only see how the public is reacting to individual projects, but also we have an open-ended comment ability on all the projects, so we can get a sense of different components of the projects, what they like, what they have questions about. It's just a really good sense for us qualitatively. Okay. So, update on projects. Here are the numbers. Let me flip to where they are in my package. So these are very preliminary, but they do reflect, we have gotten cost estimates, preliminary cost estimates on the public projects. So the streetscaping projects, Pugsley Park and Monument Park, our cost estimator has given initial numbers. The good news is that they came in lower than we had initially estimated. We do, however, think those numbers are going to go up a bit because we know that they don't include certain things, and we've got to nail down those details. We know that the estimates are missing a few items that should be in there. But it was kind of good news for the most part. The one that did come in a little higher than we had was Pugsley Park. Came in actually a couple $100,000 more than we estimated. We'll go through that. We think there are ways to kind of get that number down a little bit. But basically the bottom line is we're at about $17.5 million total with all the projects that are on the list as of now. Generally you want to come in 10 to 13 million, 12 to 13 or so. Actually, you want to come in a little bit higher to give yourselves a cushion so that the state has a good menu to choose from. So there is some cutting that needs to happen, but we think it's all very doable. We can go through that tonight. We're going to come back to this number slide later on in the presentation. We'll come back to it so you can kind of, after we go through all the projects, you'll see again where we are on the number side.
I just want to add something on that. I know we talked about this a little bit, this concept of you've got $9.7 million to work with, but why do we want to come in a little bit higher than that? And so I want to reiterate that a little bit. So the key reason for that is, say there's a project that's included in the DRI plan, it's selected by the state to be funded, and then for one reason or another, the project falls apart. There's another funding source that doesn't come through. We think that the project sponsor has site control, and for some reason that doesn't pan out. You want to have a buffer in there so that if something like that happens, you don't leave money on the table. Now, the other side of that is, and this is something that we've come across in other communities, is, well, we need to come in over $10 million. Can't we just have everything, right? Can't we just put everything on the list and make the state, try to figure it out? And the problem with that, it's sort of up to you all to sort of figure out which projects end up in the plan. The problem with that is that it's taking decision-making out of your hands and putting it in the hands of someone at the state.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to make sense. That does away with the purpose of this whole committee and
That's
all these months.
exactly the point that I'm trying to make, right? So we had one committee that we worked with who they had a hard time making that final decision, and we ended up with a plan at around $15 million. And our folks from the state didn't love that. It was a little higher than they really wanted. And what that meant was that there were projects that were in the plan that just weren't going to get funded because that was a little bit too high. It's going to happen at $12 million too, but it's a little bit, it's more control in your hands if we can come in, in that sort of $12 million range rather than trying to have it all and trying to put as much into the plan as possible. So that's a little bit of that balance of we don't want to come in right at 9.7. We don't want to be too high so that you all aren't the sort of decision makers here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anybody have questions about that process? Laura?
So I do. So hypothetically, let's just say that it comes to like $12 million. I get it that the state ultimately is the sole decider on funding this. So who gets cut then? Like, who decides? Let's just say it comes at 12, it's 17 right now, so it comes to 12. So then we are like maybe a little over to something million. So who decides what gets cut?
Do you want to speak to that, Dave? Sure. What that process kind of looks like on the state side?
So, the state goes
and
through.
What's the criteria?
The state goes through its own evaluation process based on the sort of the published criteria for DRI. So we have evaluators at various agencies, and they go through all the projects and rank them and score them based on criteria, and then they get listed in priority, and that's how they get and then we recommend them up to the governor's office.
You do. Who recommends it to the government? The state?
Department of State ultimately does, but we work in a collaborative process with Housing and Community Renewal and Empire State Development as well.
I think also part of being on this committee is committed to being unpopular with your friends who have submitted projects, because we have to look at the higher goal of making Peekskill the best possible place for the residents with the most possible opportunities and benefits to them. And we're gonna make approximately $5 million of people sad. And that's our job.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
It's also important to say that we're here attending these meetings, so we can bring into that evaluation process sort of the spirit and intent of the work in the community that may not come through as clearly if you're reading the project profiles as an uninformed evaluator. So that's why Elizabeth's here, I'm here, Megan Taylor's been here. So we do bring some knowledge outside of what's documented. But that being said, the reason why we are looking to all the project sponsors to bring as much information as possible into the process and ultimately into the plan is because each of the project profiles essentially serves as a mini grant application. So when the evaluators are looking through the projects, they're looking for the detailed project information, the readiness, the site control if that's applicable, the financing is all in place, all of those sort of things that we've been talking about. Those are the same things that the state evaluators are looking for as well.
And Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but just as a member of the regional council, if something doesn't make this list, but but the work has been put into it, it is possible to go for a CFA also for some of these.
Well, certainly.
That's not unusual, and CFA.
Consolidated funding application.
Yeah, that's another funding application. And then I've seen
consultants that have spoken to this, but there is a section after the project profiles recommended for funding where we encourage communities to include projects that, although not recommended for DRI funding, are viewed positively, and the community believes that those are important, so that when other funding sources, whether they be state or otherwise, you can point to this. A whole process was done, there was community input, we had a committee, and these projects were deemed worthy, but maybe not quite ready because of timing or whatever the case may be.
Okay, so just one more question. That I know you folks worked in that similar project in Middletown. Did you run into similar situation where it was, and could you speak a little bit about that?
Gosh, that feels like a lifetime ago. No, in Middletown, I don't recall it being hard. We came in like kind of where we were, but there wasn't as long of a list. The projects were very much more clear from the beginning. We had a very strong mayor who wanted like X, Y, and Z, and we added a few projects, but they were pretty known throughout the process. But in Owego and Watkins Glen, we did have to make some cuts. Very similar to this situation. And I think in those communities it might have been even harder because they were really small, and so they definitely knew their neighbors even more than you guys do, and it was hard for them. But they did it, and I think it was a stronger plan for it. Thank you. Yeah. And just, I think to follow along with what Dave was saying about the project profiles being mini grant applications, and it's their perspective is helpful because they've been part of the process. But we're also approaching the project profiles as, someone's opening up this book, they've never read it, they don't know what Peekskill, is really all about. We need to make the profile speak to why this is a strong project and why this needs to happen. So that's in the back of our minds, and you'll see if you've looked at the draft project profiles, there have been some changes made, but we still have more work to do to make those stronger and concise. What is the big takeaway for this project? Why should the state do it? That's kind of where we're going. But I think that's a good, actually, segue to the next slide.
Susan, can I just since we're on this topic, you will get the draft. You've seen the draft project profiles or the sort of emerging project profiles as they come along. You'll see the draft plan. It's very important that as you read through that, if the facts, the spirit and intent, the enthusiasm of particular projects isn't coming through for you, as you'd like it to, as a group, that's input that we want to get back. So that's, we're not just giving it to you sort of as a pro forma, like, here it is, it's going to be final next time. We're really giving it to you because we want it to reflect what this group believes and sees in these projects. So particularly on the project profile, there's a whole upfront part about the downtown profile, and feel free to comment on that as well. But the project profiles is really the key expression of this group's interest and enthusiasm of the various projects. So,
yeah,
so please comment on that, even if it's, I feel like there needs to be more information, or there is more information that's not in here, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but
Or here's a typo, I'm happy to have those as well. So it can be as minor as a typo and as important as, you left out this key information that makes this stronger. So thanks for making that point. This is an important slide, and I think speaks to a little bit about what Dave was just talking about the evaluation that the state does, but this is the evaluation that you all need to do. And we've talked about a lot of these different criteria throughout the process, so none of this should be new information, but it's perhaps a new way to look at this in terms of the screening process. So you have a lot of different factors here, but really there's kind of two levels here. There's the number one is the threshold, and this is kind of just, before you even consider the other factors, really. It's the feasibility and project readiness. So is it close to being ready to start? Is it pretty much shovel ready? Are they ready to go? What is the status of the other funding, if there is other funding? Is it locked up? Have they applied for a grant? Do they have a sense that this is a grant they're going to get? Do they have a track record with that particular grantor? Those are the kind of things that we want to look at. Are there any issues with ownership of the site or control, or are there regulatory problems? Does the project need a zoning change that may not happen? That's the kind of threshold issue that we want to know about. What is the project sponsor's track record like? Do they have the capacity to pull off this type of project? Do they have a history? Do they know Peekskill? Are they known in Peekskill? And then what's the ongoing capacity to sustain that project, to implement it? Those are all kind of threshold issues, and if there's a project that doesn't quite meet all those, then that's kind of a big red flag. and maybe before we even get to the other criteria and how they meet those criteria. There are projects that might be great projects that might further some of these other criteria. They might have co-benefits, they might be great for the environment, they might promote historic preservation, they might align very well with the state and your local goals. They might be on their own transformative, and they may be very much supported by the public. But if they don't meet kind of these threshold issues, then they're probably not going to be DRI projects. They're probably just not ready. And they may be more appropriate for another funding source. So that's kind of a good way to think about this list of projects as we start to dig into that. All of these other criteria, which are listed under number 2, they are also very important. And so that's what we're looking at when we're going to give you pros and cons for these projects. Kind of how to start looking at it through that lens. But basically it's this 2-step screening process that we think is going to be really helpful for you as you think about maybe what projects to cut. Any questions on this? Okay. So with that, we're going to dive into, we got a handful, 3 or 4 maybe, new project ideas that were submitted after the technical open call deadline. And we got a couple just at the end of the deadline last week. But I'm just going to go through these, and then at the end of this section, we're going to give you our recommendations on how to treat these new projects. So the first one was submitted by a couple local folks that we actually met with. They came to our office hours a few weeks ago. And this is really a project about expanding, creating, establishing, but also expanding Latino-owned businesses here in Peekskill. It's obviously a very important element of the community. Many of their downtown businesses are Latino-owned. And we want to make sure that we support those, and we encourage new businesses to locate. The crux of this project, as we understand it, is to develop a Latino business alliance. This group may exist, or it may have existed, but it would really be about building that group up as an advocacy organization, someone that could sort of interface between businesses and the city. That appears to be, we heard it at the Business Owners Roundtable too, that appears to be a little bit of a barrier for some Latino-owned businesses, that they have a hard time and always knowing the processes that the city has, and you know, being able to navigate those processes. So some specifics that were mentioned in this project was creating you know, a digital archive, a list of Latino-owned businesses that are members of this business alliance, a map of those businesses, and then some physical improvements to the storefronts, signage, overall beautification, events, and educational programs. And we'll come back to this project as we do with all the other new projects and give you kind of our sense of pros and cons, but we just wanted to describe the project to you. So the estimate here of funding would be $200,000. It's basically a public project. We're not quite sure who the sponsor would be, but it would be a sort of public type project, so no other funding source. So that's that one. The next one was also submitted by residents, and it's called Safe Steps for All. And this is really about improving the overall walking environment, focusing on South Street, Central Avenue, and Main Street, looking at particularly pedestrians that may have mobility or ambulatory issues, so people with disabilities, seniors, and also mothers with young children, or fathers with young children, strollers basically. And the components of this project would be some streetscape improvements on South Street, sidewalks, lighting, etc. Some better signage to make it more clear where people can go and make the signage multilingual, seating, and then a trolley or shuttle service. So the total funding here was estimated at $250,000, and this is again a public project, so no other funding was proposed. Did you have a question, Bree?
So one of the, I'm glad this came up, because one of the things that I feel like is missing from our thing is there are 9 intersections in Peekskill where there are lights that either never go on or don't work, and people keep dying.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not addressing that, and the city has got their ear, something's not happening, because it's been like that for the last 6, 7 years I've been in Peekskill. So is there any way that we can, do we do a study? Because it seems like the state would want to fund that so less people would die. Is there something we could fund where we could just get a study done to get those things,
I think
at least
if we know
awareness
what they
around so
are,
people stop dying?
then we don't have to do a study, and our intent is that we would bring those into the streetscaping project.
Great.
Yeah, so we've been trying to track, and that goes back to the numbers that I was talking about earlier. They're not necessarily all costed out yet, but we've been tracking where the crosswalks are missing, where the paint's faded out, where the pedestrian countdowns don't work, things like that, because it is basic safety issues. Yeah. So thanks. Any other questions? questions on this one?
Yeah, just the budget number of that 250 wouldn't scratch the surface of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this was the budget submitted by the project sponsor, so it's their estimate, but yeah,
Okay.
there's a lot of details that would go into that. So the next one we got was the idea, actually submitted by a resident nearby, a public restroom on Central Avenue. This would go kind of midway up the hill. It would be a one-story building with some solar panels on the roof, a small seating area, and a playground. There was no cost of an estimate provided for this one.
Is the idea of this, I don't know if they put any details, kind of thing you might see in, I've seen it in Germany and in other places in Europe, where it's like very, like stainless steel, it washes itself. I mean,
I don't think it got into that level of detail. I think the intent here was a respite as you're going up the hill to provide, obviously a public bathroom, but also a way to kind of stop the walk, give you a break, ease that walk up the hill. Was, I think, the intent behind this.
So with the city of Peekskill ones, is there a person who's responsible for these, or is it a general, who submitted these?
So this was submitted by a man named George Souls. I think he's a resident of Yorktown. But we've indicated that the city would be the sponsor because it would need to be a public project. So they didn't all necessarily identify a sponsor, the people who submitted, but we gave our best guess at who would make sense for it to be sponsored.
So it wasn't submitted by?
It was not submitted by the city. No, none of these projects were submitted by the city.
But what you just said, having benches, like we break up walks all the time with benches so that people can stop. That's very different than a public restroom.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So. The next one, and I think this might be, okay, second to last new project. This was submitted last week by the Peekskill Museum, which is actually just outside the DRI boundary. You could always move the boundary if you wanted to, if you like this project, but just to give you that sense. Basically, this is on their building itself. It's a historic house. They have heating, but they don't have AC, and so that's a problem for them, both in terms of their events that they can have year-round, and also the storage of their artifacts, which I think are largely stored in the attic. It's not climate controlled, so that's an issue. So this would install new HVAC system. It would upgrade the parking lot and the driveway from the current dirt and gravel to some sort of a more historically appropriate and solid structure or surface. And the last element is that there historically was a side porch on the building, which I guess fell into some disrepair and was removed mid-century. And this would restore that porch, which would allow them to hold bigger events and do things outside. So the cost estimate here is $119,000. The project sponsor would be the Peekskill Museum. They are not proposing any other funding for this project. Questions? Yeah.
Are they 501c?
I believe they are a nonprofit organization. Yeah. So they actually submitted another project, and this is throughout the city, so it could be in the existing DRI area. Historic signage, and you may have to help me on this one. Well, we didn't write this profile, but augmented reality app. The best I can understand it, I spoke with a gentleman, and it's, I think you scan it with your phone, and it does some cool things. Right, and I think it pulls things up on your phone. It tells you about where you are. It might pull up historic photos of the building that you're in front of, things like that. Yeah, I didn't mean to be totally dismissive. For example, I was in Disney World with my family a few months ago, and they have something similar where you scan your your phone, and it translates the alien language into English in front of you on the sign. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do just by scanning a QR code on your phone. And I think it's actually a really interesting idea that he spoke about. A way to kind of bring history alive and to give you more than just a historic marker would be able to give you. Something that is more interactive. It would go along with traditional historic signage as well. So I think.
Are we considering some of these to be folded into Avon?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about in a moment. Whether we want to consider these as new standalone projects, or we want to incorporate pieces of them into existing projects, or whether they're not ready for DRI. So the final one, this was actually submitted by Councilman Fernandez. And the idea here would be to install new bus stop shelters where they currently are lacking at certain bus stops throughout the downtown. And the specific locations mentioned, and some of these we're already aware of. One is at Monument Park, there's one at the train station, and then there's two that are across the street from each other at basically the intersection of Main and James. And none of those currently have shelters. So we actually have been back and forth with the county this week about sort of the mechanics of the agreement that the county has with the city, how they make the decision on installing bus shelters, what are the costs. And so we're getting some of those numbers. Some of the locations that the councilman proposed are not in the DRI areas, they wouldn't be eligible. Others were proposed to upgrade existing shelters where there already are shelters. So we'll talk about that in a moment. We're not quite sure about sort of the transformative nature of that aspect of it. He didn't indicate a cost, but we have been getting cost numbers from the county. So they're about $8,000 to $10,000 a piece, these shelters. So it's not a huge dollar amount, but there are some logistical hurdles that we'll talk about actually in the next slide. This is the recap slide. So we have, let's see, 6, so half a dozen new projects. So we'll go through, again, the summary of the cost and then also kind of our recommendation. So the first one was, again, that expansion and support and creation of Latino businesses. There's a couple things going on here. So first of all, some of this is already being done or is in the process of being done by the BID and the Chamber of Commerce. And we think that there are some, we hope that there's some improved relationships between Latino business owners and those organizations. I actually think that the Business Owners Roundtable was helpful in bringing people together. But there's certainly opportunity to continue doing that type of thing through the existing organizations. There are also some aspects of this project that are not eligible, like the education and programming. And then there's some pieces that are the physical improvements and upgrades, like the store signage and storefronts, that are kind of already in the DRI list, right? They're in that downtown revitalization fund, and that's really ideal for small business owners for that kind of improvement. So our recommendation would be to incorporate this idea within those existing projects. So basically the marketing branding piece, which is already a DRI project, we want to make sure that that really hits home, that it needs to be fully inclusive of the entire business community, it needs to be multilingual, needs to make sure that you're supporting and expanding existing Latino-owned businesses, and then also make it clear that there is a lot of interest among these business owners in the kind of upgrades that would be part of the fund. So the exact components of that fund are chosen by the city later. It's going to be a competitive process, but I think it helps the state if they can see that there's demonstrated interest, that we can document, these people told us that they wanted to upgrade their building, these people were interested in new signage. It just shows that there's a groundswell of interest. So that's kind of what we would recommend for that project. Any questions on that one? Okay. The next one is the Safe Steps for All project, and I think the really good news on this one is that we've kind of already been talking about basically all of the components that were listed. I think it was helpful in flagging specific areas, and we heard that at the workshop too. We heard a lot of interest on South Street, and we've been kind of bringing that a little bit more into the larger streetscape project. But we've been looking at all of this type of stuff, benches and lighting and trees and safety issues. So we think that this project can be fully incorporated within those other streetscape projects. The trolley aspect of this project is already being considered, I think, in the current Peekskill ride project, which is, we'll talk about in a moment, it's project 2D. So this is one that we think can be incorporated within existing projects. The restroom on Central Avenue is a little bit tougher, I think, for us to make a recommendation on. There is a public restroom here in this building. It's literally right around the corner. We're just not sure that that's a transformative project. We're not sure about the need for that. I think we'd be concerned, as probably with the city, about maintenance. So this is, sorry, where it would go, if there's sufficient space. So this is one that we would not recommend for DRI funding. Any thoughts on that? Okay. Last is the Peekskill Museum. This is another tough one. They're a good organization, and we'd like to see them, grow and thrive here in Peekskill. We're not sure though about new HVAC and a new porch, how transformative that is for them as an organization. Is it going to drastically change their programming? Is it going to allow them do, you know, significantly more than they do now, it's not clear. A driveway and a parking lot, perhaps not the most transformative. They're not in the DRI area, so you have to make a decision on shifting that boundary if you really felt that it was a strong enough project. We're just not quite sure that it is, but I'm open to any other thoughts.
I will just say that I think they strive to do excellent programming, but it is a little tough sitting there if it's 85 out.
Yeah.
They have fans blowing. It truly is a Victorian experience in a Victorian building.
They have a whole string, which I just learned today. It's really
It kind of goes with the whole gestalt, but
Yeah.
I personally believe that it would be helpful for them to have some climate control in that building. Their hours are very limited. I don't know if it would enable them to expand their hours. I don't know if that's any part of what they articulate in their statement. But I think it's a worthy organization that speaks to the roots of this community. Ultimately, obviously, the committee will decide whether or not it's worth funding, but I would certainly be in favor of that.
And keep in mind also that this is one you could recommend for other funding too. I mean, they would be eligible for CFA funding if that's something that you all wanted to do. And we can keep this in the mix for the time being. We can come back to it later in the night. Anybody else have thoughts on
We
this
also
one?
have to find a place for those Evening Star negatives, because there's an immense archive
Oh
of
my
negatives
goodness.
there.
Yeah.
And it stresses me out how hot it is there.
Yeah.
And if that's one of their concerns, then when they're not gonna get this,
Yeah.
I feel like that needs to be addressed.
What Bree is referring to is they have something like 30,000 negatives from the old newspaper here, the Evening Star, and they're in basically card catalog files on the second floor of that building.
And that's
they
I
really
believe
need to
that's a
preserve.
revenue generator for them too, because they sell photos, so that's kind of an important part of their mission.
Can those be moved to the library archives? The library has
Unclear.
their own archives.
Right, well, you don't know if the museum is gonna wanna do that, but I just wanna remind everyone that, if you put this, we're at the point now where if you put this in, then something else is gonna be out, and so,
Yeah.
so that's, and then changing the whole DRI boundary is a whole other
Yeah.
thing.
I mean, yeah. It's not a huge dollar amount, but Marcia's right. It means that's gonna have to come off something else, but we can come back to that question.
Going back to what David asked before, or said before, if the committee made a very positive statement about it, does that help to get funding later on?
I think that would be helpful. I mean, it's not a sure thing in terms of CFA funding,
Like,
but
for
it's
example,
helpful.
we said, we would love to do it, all things being equal, but it's not, we're far along, and it's not in the boundary. But sort of, so that when they go to make a CFA application, for example, they can cite the study that's been previously done. Does that help?
Yeah, well, it certainly helps to be noted in, community-supported plans, particularly if they've been funded and supported by the potential funder, in this case being the state. But there's no question that when you apply for state funding, if you can cite that it is a part of a community-approved plan and process, that adds to the case.
The other museum project that they submitted, which is the historic signage and augmented reality app, we actually think that this could be incorporated in the marketing and branding strategy, and we'd already we started looking at historical markers and signs and costing those out. Whether the app also goes with that is a little bit less clear, but we think that there's definitely a role for the museum to play in that project. We've actually already added them as a project partner for the marketing and branding and wayfinding, because that's an important element of just getting around Peekskill is understanding where the historic resources are. So this is one that we think we can incorporate, at least in some fashion, if not the whole project, we can incorporate in marketing and branding. So the last one is the bus stop shelters. We just got some information this afternoon from the county, and we've been talking a little bit with them about how they come to a decision on where to put bus stops. And there's basically two major factors. The first is the number of riders at that stop, and they kind of estimate that an average daily ridership. That's kind of a threshold issue for them, and then also just the space. They have certain ADA requirements. They have to have a certain amount of space for there to be a shelter. So they got back to us today, and I'm going to double check with them on this, but they basically said that none of the locations that were mentioned have enough ridership to basically warrant a bus shelter. The only one that does is the one that is on the north side of Main Street and James. There's that vacant grassy area, and apparently there actually used to be a bus shelter there, and the property owner really didn't like that there, and basically insisted that it be removed, and has now put up a wrought iron fence that basically prevents there being a bus stop shelter there. So that's kind of what we got from the county, which is unfortunate. We also talked with them because there was interest in actually providing for upgraded shelters that have Wi-Fi, that you can plug in your cell phone and charge it, that maybe have a 911 call, and LED advertising. The answer we got from the county was that's not in their model. Like no municipality in Westchester has that kind of bus shelter. They have a whole agreement with the licensee to do maintenance on bus shelters throughout the county, and if you were to go and use a different type of bus shelter, then you have to renegotiate the agreement, and basically the city would be responsible for maintaining that type of shelter. That was the answer we got. They are happy to install shelters where they meet those thresholds. They love shelters, but basically they have a model. It's 8 to 10,000. It's what you have now. It does have solar panel on the top, which is kind of nice. But that's the answer we got, unfortunately, is that of the locations mentioned, they don't apparently meet the ridership. Even the one at the train station, which was surprising. We're going to double back with them on those numbers and make sure, because the cost here is not high. And if we can get some of these shelters, if it makes sense, then we can easily bring them into streetscaping, into the existing projects.
I think something we need to do is encourage all forms of transit, including the bus. And people won't ride it if they don't know about it, if they don't know when the schedule is, if they don't feel safe waiting for it, or if they just feel like they're treated like a second-class citizen because they're waiting in the rain for the bus. So using average daily ridership, I think, is just not a good method for trying to measure how many people would use something, because if it was convenient and nice to use, there's a saying where you don't measure whether you need a bridge or not by looking at how many people swim across the river. So I love that this has become a proposal and a topic of conversation. It's something, quite frankly, should be coming out of county, city type budgets. We probably don't fund that adequately. So I would like to put that high on the list of things that we prioritize as a city and try to get funding for. If it doesn't work through this, and using those numbers, I think it just doesn't make any sense.
I hear what you're saying. Unfortunately, that's the county's, that's their methodology. But we are going to try to push back a little bit, because the initial cost is not really the issue. I mean, we have this funding opportunity. It's not a huge cost. It's sort of the ongoing legal arrangement and maintenance that is more the issue. And we've already included this in the Monument Park, and we could take it out if it's not going to be eligible. But so it's not a huge dollar amount, and it's not an insurmountable thing from that angle. It's just whether it actually works from the county's perspective. And they did say, the good news is that they apparently are going to be upgrading a lot of their buses, which will include charging for your phone, plugs, and Wi-Fi.
We would never have a train station without a roof.
Yeah. So that's where we stand on that.
Can I just have a quick question? Did they give you the numbers? I mean, how many people have to be at a bus stop?
I think they said they like it to be 25 a day, 25 people on average.
I can't believe James Street in Maine doesn't have that every time.
The one on the north side does, but the problem there is that there's not room for the bus shelter, and the adjacent property owner does not want there to be a bus shelter there.
That shouldn't be up to him anyway.
Well, I think it's on his property.
I just want to comment. So the property owner of that street that we're talking about, he's actually requested the county move the bus stop further down the block, because he's proposing to put a brand new development over there. The issue that he's having is, I'm assuming why that gated fence, I thought that was always there, but if he put it up there, the issue that he was saying he's having is litter from the people who are waiting there. So when they're waiting at the bus stop, and especially if it's raining, they're throwing the litter. And the other issue is, now that there's a Dunkin' Donuts across the street, and now that there's a Jamaican restaurant across the street, people are eating at the bus stop, and they don't want to carry the garbage on the bus with them, so they're throwing the garbage. And you get a few, not many, but you do get a few people that miss the garbage and don't feel like they need to pick it up. So I think that was more of his issue. I don't want to say that he was against the actual bus stop and shelter. I think his issue was just the litter that he was receiving from the bus stop being right in front of his property. It was like a quality of life issue for him.
So I guess the short answer then is stay tuned, because we're continuing to iron out these details, and we can incorporate that into the streetscaping projects if these are feasible.
If
we chose to buy one of these or two of these, would they still do the maintenance? They wouldn't do
The
it?
answer I got is no,
Okay.
because it's not part, they said you'd have to rework the agreement, and it's not part of their whole
Wait,
licensing.
the county
agreement.
said they wouldn't?
The county said no.
No, I think what he's asking is if the Peekskill bought one, that's their model, their everything, would the county then maintain it?
Oh, yes.
That's what you're asking?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I thought you meant if the Peekskill bought like a sort of a higher end model.
No.
No, if,
we bought
yeah,
that
that's
one,
fine, that's fine.
they would pay.
Well,
Not if it's-
not if it doesn't meet the threshold, is I think the answer I was getting this afternoon. So, yeah. But we'll follow up to make sure that that's clear. Okay. So any thoughts or questions on these new projects?
So if I could just take this opportunity to underscore my previous point about project profiles. I think it's very easy in these circumstances to say, we're gonna fold this into streetscape as kind of the classic example. So the project profile, when it comes out, should be detailed and saying what streetscape means, what it's going to have, where it's going to be located, how many of garbage cans, benches, whatever the case may be, bump outs, intersections addressed, because $1 million or $2 million or $3 million doesn't really go all that far when you start to get into a long laundry list. So again, when the project profiles come out, you want to look at them in detail and see what does streetscape mean, because as with many things, streetscape means different things to different people, and your expectations of what that project might include, or any of them, might be different than what it actually says. And from the state's perspective, when we fund a streetscape project, as an example, there certainly is flexibility. We're not going to say, you said 8 benches, so you only get 8 benches. There is a design component of it, so it's meant to be illustrative. But when we're talking about certain areas and certain major components of streetscape, we want to see those reflected in the project profile. So that would apply to any project as we're folding things in. If it's wayfinding, streetscape, there's probably some others. Take a look at those and see if the elements that you think are important are actually included in those projects and in the budgets for them.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And they already are being included on the budget side, because we do have to cost out 20 street trees, X linear feet of sidewalk repair, new plantings, all of that, signs, all of that is being itemized and is not final at this point, but it is being worked on. And so on the cost side, that's definitely going in. It's on us to make sure on the word side, we're very clear on all the different components that are being included in the streetscaping. Any final questions on this slide? Other questions? Okay. I'm going to turn it to Simon to now go through the projects you know about already that we've been talking about previously.
Okay, so as we did last month, we're gonna sort of go through each of the projects, and what's a little bit different here is instead of the bullet points of summary of each project, we've put up a concise idea of what we think the sort of pros and cons are, so that we can all start thinking about are these projects meeting the thresholds, that first threshold, project readiness? Are there other issues that we need to be thinking about? A big part of the work that we've been doing for the last month and a half is for projects that aren't quite at the finish line of being a strong DRI project, trying to figure out what details or fill in the holes, find out what those details are that we need. For the public projects, trying to bring them along further, getting those cost estimates. And so we've hopefully answered some of those questions, but where we haven't been able to answer those questions, that's where we're starting to think about where are some of these projects standing. So this first one we've talked about quite a few times is bringing high-speed broadband to downtown, installing fiber optic cables to provide fast internet service. This is one that as we've talked about, we've been trying to fill in some of those details. We got a sense of where existing fiber is. We don't feel like we've been able to get a complete picture of that. We're not exactly sure who who that sponsor would be. So this is one of those projects where we think it's a good idea. We're not quite exactly sure how it gets implemented yet.
What I read on this is that some of the funds would come from business owners downtown to cover the cost, and some of the business owners downtown are already providing their own Wi-Fi service and paying for it anyway. And so my question was, how is that cost gonna work out, and what are those costs to the business owners?
That was an idea that we had about how to make this project have some private leverage. The concept that we came up with was basically that the cost of putting fiber in the streets would be funded 100% by DRI. The cost of getting from the street into the building could be 50-50. It's sort of one idea for a model of it to get, because it's benefiting a property owner to draw in their tenants, but it's a level of detail that we haven't even gotten to yet, because we don't know enough about what the need is in the streets, to be honest. We haven't been able to fill in that detail.
Could a business owner opt out if they already have their own?
Yeah, this wouldn't be a requirement. So that's legwork that we would have gotten to if we were able to fill in some of those earlier threshold issues. Is working through the bid, through the chamber, to try to figure out what the specific demand is. Are there specific property owners, specific businesses who would pay for this? Not just the installation, but for the service from a provider. And there were details before that, threshold details before that we frankly haven't been able to feel comfortable enough with having sort of fill that in yet. So that was the idea that we had, the model that we had sort of put out there, but like I said, there's threshold details that I don't think we were able to fill in. So
isn't the project sponsor like Fios from Verizon? Would we just be giving money to Verizon to charge us money for internet?
The way that the conversations that we've had with Crown Castle, for example, is that when they install fiber, they charge a business, right? They don't put it in for free. So this would be DRI, filling that in so that it doesn't have to come from a property owner. It would come from DRI, and it would lay the groundwork sort of downtown wide. We know where Crown Castle provides fiber in downtown. You can see on the map up here, it's a good portion of the downtown. It's not everywhere. It's what's in orange. We weren't able to get the information from other providers. So our sense is, we don't know for sure whether there's a strong need for this right now or not.
So it sounds like this one might not be ready for DRI.
Right, or maybe not even need it.
Yeah.
Because as Simon just mentioned, we weren't able to get that information from kind of the big providers like Verizon. It may be that it's already in existence from Verizon's network. So.
Where I'm at, where the blue line is, I've got screamingly fast awesome internet at the end.
So, yeah.
It's like the best internet I've ever had as a business.
Wow.
And
You should get out there and publicize that. That'd be great.
So I have a question. So is the holdup you trying to identify a Verizon contact, or they just you requested the information they have yet to submit to?
The key contact that we had was with the city's IT consultant, and we talked it through with him, and he was skeptical about the need for it. We could continue to dig in with Verizon and Altice and get more information, but that's as far as we were able to get up until now.
But there's really no project sponsor here, right? The city is just a plug. I mean, because in order to have a feasible project, you need a sponsor that the state can grant funds to.
Right.
To my knowledge, there isn't one here.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Not at this stage, right? Yeah. So that's.
And you've probably never granted money to Verizon in the DRI, would you? Safe to say?
So let's move on to the next one here, and we can talk about this more as we go through. So this one is the other internet project, right? This is a little bit more targeted. This would be providing affordable internet service to Bowman Towers and Barham senior houses, and it would also provide free Wi-Fi outdoor in the public realm around that area, around Pugsley Park and Lepore Park along the Main Street corridor. This one has a sponsor, has a sponsor identified, so that puts it a little bit further along, and it's providing a low-cost internet service for we think an underserved population. So it's a little bit of a different focus than the prior project. and it's a little bit easier to identify how it would happen because it has a specific sponsor.
This is one that I guess we like a little bit more, to be blunt. This sponsor was previously awarded DRI money in the Bronx. I think that there were some logistical details with that round of DRI that they worked out, and I believe in that model they had a nonprofit that they worked through, and it was kind of like the middleman, and that proved a little bit cumbersome, as we understand. So I think in this round they're proposing that they would just be the sponsor and work directly on the project. There's a lot of details that we still need to nail down on this project. We'd like to maybe get their leverage a little bit more significant, but we think it's an important element. Again, you're serving an underserved population, people who live in downtown Peekskill who may need this service.
My experience with public Wi-Fi, it's just picked up by my phone, it's that it's just awful and slow and it's not secure, so I'm not really sure why it's even something that we'd want to put in place. I guess my other question is, in these areas, obviously exclusive of the parks, meaning in Bowman Towers, et cetera, is there currently cable service where the residents could avail themselves of?
So on the second question, there's sort of 2 points on that. Number one is that the benefit that we know is that it would be more affordable. It would be cheaper. The one that we don't is how many residents in those buildings need it, which is a key question that we've got on our list to follow up. On the public Wi-Fi, my sense is that some people have unlimited data on their cell phone plans, some people don't. And if you don't, and you're in the public realm, and you need to get on the internet, that's the use case for it.
I guess we need specifics also on if it's going to be lower cost. What does that mean? How much lower?
Yeah, we have some of those. I think this is a definite example of that. This is about access to digital access and your basic human rights. I mean, this in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, there is a gap in information, and information loss is a huge deal, and it compromises people's education, and I just think that this is a really important project as well.
Do you know if a fiber study has been done on the locations that they've chosen? Because they're specifically saying it's going to ride on existing fiber. If there's not fiber in those locations, what happens to that?
I believe that at least one of those buildings does have fiber. I'm not 100% sure about both of them. I'm thinking back to their application, and also we learned a little bit about that with the broadband project that we looked at. At least one of those properties does have fiber.
You say fiber, you mean fiber street in front of it?
Yeah.
Well,
In the street
Bowman
and connected
must,
to the building.
It's in Maine.
I think Bowman does. I'm not sure about the other areas.
Yeah.
I think generally, I totally agree with what was said. I think this is one you got to keep on here for now, because if we could pull it off, it would be a terrible message to send to not do it.
Yep.
And since we don't know that we can't do it, I think we don't really have a choice but to keep it on.
Doesn't have Wi-Fi access. And that's right.
For the other funding.
Yeah, the other funding was provided by NetShare, by the project sponsor. Yeah. So the next one here is the marketing, branding, and wayfinding project. This is one that I think has gotten general support along the way. What's been nice is that we've been able to start filling in some of the details. We got some information from the city about specific historical signs and specific locations for those. We got, as Susan talked about before, information from the Peekskill Museum that we can piggyback off of. The project cost here is reflective of it having these three different components. It's branding, it's marketing strategy, and also wayfinding. The next step for us is to do a little bit more of that itemization of where the specific signs are, how many are there, so that we can narrow in on a more detailed project cost. We think that this is a conservative number for now, and we're going to narrow in on it in the next probably week or two.
Where my business is in the corner that was neglected in this project, and then there's also Be First Boxing and the Homeless Shelter and the other businesses around there. It would be nice to not neglect that.
Any other comments or questions on this one? The next one is the solar power on North Water Street. So this one has been pretty consistent throughout. It's a relatively low DRI ask. This is putting solar panels on the building that Bree is in the process of renovating. I think the question for us is, number one, is this transformative, and number two, is there another funding source? We could talk about this a little bit more and get into some of those details, but those are the questions that came to mind for us. Another thing that we'll talk about when we get to the fund is what are the downtown revitalization fund is what the specific eligible activities are, and one thing that has come up, I think we've talked about it at least one of the prior meetings here, is using the fund in part to allow for funds to help with solar installation on rooftops, downtown businesses. So maybe that's a way, that's for discussion, right? Maybe that's a way for something like this to happen as well. Okay, so the next couple are some of the public projects, and so what we've tried to do since the public workshop is fill in more of the details, in particular on these streetscape projects. Dave mentioned before, right, this can't just be a chunk of money that's going towards some abstract concept of streetscape to be designed in the future. There will be a design phase, but we need to start filling in some of the details. So the first section here is that connection from the waterfront into downtown. So we're looking particularly at Central Avenue, but also on South Street. A focus on South Street is something that came out of comments at the public workshop, and also on the new project that Susan mentioned before. And so you can see on the map here where sort of in particular what we're looking at: street trees along Central, two-way bike lane, crosswalks at the intersection of Washington and Central and Washington and South are two things that are needed. And also, one of the things that we noted is that South Street, if you're going west from Division, for about 2 blocks or so, has nicely repaired sidewalks as part of the downtown that the city's, I think, done in recent years. But then you get a little bit further west of that, and the sidewalks are not quite as good a repair. So that was a component of this as well, is looking at replacing those sidewalks there. We've got 2 slides for this, so we can jump back to that prior slide if we need it. But one of the things that I want to highlight here is that in the version of the project profiles that we sent to you on Friday, we had a placeholder cost of $1 million for this project. And when we got the itemized cost estimates back, it came in under $700,000. Now, Susan said this is going to move around a little bit, so it might go up, but it was nice for us to see that a first cut came in below, not above what we had identified. So that's a nice start.
On Central Avenue, where you're showing the bike, I'm assuming if it's that budget, that curb to curb, the road's not changing. You're just narrowing the travel way.
Correct.
And then putting something like that.
Exactly. So it's not extending a curb. There are a couple of places that I'll highlight, not on this slide, but on others, where we're proposing curb extensions. But curb extensions often are not as simple, Bill, I'm sure you know this, are not as simple as just putting some concrete on the street and putting a new curb down. If there's drainage, you've got to move that whole drainage system, right? So then the costs really go through the roof. So where we could on improvements like this, we've tried to avoid that, so that the costs come in a little bit more reasonable. The other thing that I want to highlight with that is that the bike lane down at the bottom of Central, The street is wide enough to accommodate a two-way bike lane without losing any parking. As you get up toward the middle of Central, where Zeff's is located, and there's that other brick sort of apartment building a little bit further up, there is parking on the north side of the street there. It's a handful of spaces. The street's not wide enough to accommodate both. So it's a trade-off that we want to highlight. There might be half a dozen parking spaces. I'm sure they're needed for the folks who live there, and for former Zeffs, whatever ends up there. But that's, whenever we're talking about sort of changing the roadbed and what you're allowing there in terms of capacity, it's important to highlight those trade-offs.
Right now, there's parking on both sides of the street on Central. Where you're talking about?
At the base there is. When you get further up, it's only on the one side, I believe.
I own Zeff's. I'm pretty sure it's on both sides of the street, right there.
There is a strange parking sign. It's in the village.
Oh. Okay. I could have missed the sign. I just got lucky.
That place on South Street, just west of Washington, there's just a bunch of great businesses there, and the street is neglected, and I think that you identified that. I would just point at that one. And there's a really great opportunity. Like, a little will go a long way.
Yep.
Yeah, and just sidebar, some of the city staff did reach out to some of those businesses to gauge their interest in the fund, and there is a lot of interest in that little corridor. So that's great to see, and we can highlight that in the plan that this is a collection of businesses and property owners that indicated interest. So that's good too.
Would South of Washington be narrowed, or would drainage not allow that? Because that is an incredibly wide, long crossing right now.
I need to double check that. That's we haven't costed curb extensions there, but we'll take a look at that. Yeah, it's
and the county just
important.
rebuilt that. So that's a long crossing. So.
But that is a place where there are not, I don't believe, currently pedestrian signals. So that might be.
There are not.
What are the intersections? Bad.
Yeah. And then I'll note that if you walk on the south side of Central, when you get to Washington, you end up literally standing on the edge of the sidewalk where there is no way to cross and traffic. So glad to see that in there. I don't know how that was ever engineered like that.
Yeah, at that location, the recommendation is a crosswalk to get you to the north side and a pedestrian signal that's activated with the light.
I think what you've shown on Central is great. Just want to be clear. I would support getting rid of the parking if you need to. One of the things about Central is it's a highway, and what you're doing will change the scale of it, and it'll slow traffic, and it'll make it much more of a connection from the water up to the city. I think what you're showing is great.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is a major problem. Walking down there the other day, cars go very, very fast, and for it ever to be a nice connection like that's a big part of it. So engineering that away would really help. To me, the trade-off is well worth it. We could save, thousands of car trips by putting in a protected bike lane there, and it would help business a lot too. So to me, the trade-off is great.
Just to clarify, in the costing, is that just capital costs, or do you have design covered in there as well?
It includes design. It includes there's a contingency. There's sort of general conditions overhead that have contractor would typically charge. So we've tried to account for it's not just the cost of the paint on the road. It's also the real costs that are going to go into it.
I like the idea of the bike route and ribbon, but anytime you take away parking in front of business, that seems to me a little problematic because then the businesses do suffer. So just want to put that out there. I don't know. You said you did run by Zaf, said they're okay with it?
No, we haven't talked to them. I just mentioned that we sort of noted where the locations were so that we could talk about those trade-offs. Bill, I don't know if, as the building owner, I don't know if
we have a new tenant. I mean, I have to talk to the city about this, but we're planning on proposing some off-street parking there because it has none now. So I think that would solve that problem.
Yeah, Central strikes me as a spot where you could make up the spaces, sort of, all
just north on Central. No, I guess that's east. East on Central is up the hill. There's a city property on the right across from the other building that was used for parking. I don't know, is that, what I mean, Jim?
There's a sign there that still says resident parking only. I don't know, I don't think that I've ever seen a car parked there, but,
I remember long ago, there's an agreement between, I think, Zeff's and that building for that parking across the street. I don't think there's an agreement, but that's definitely city property there, right? No, they actually do hotel, furniture, used to be.
Oh, okay.
Business, it's good business.
Okay, so the next segment here is more of a focus on the downtown and Peekskill Plaza. This is an area where we have looked at some curb extensions in key locations, but also some other strategies to sort of change the roadbed that are more cost effective. On this slide, starting at the top and working down, some of the curb extensions are at that intersection of Central and Division. So pinching that entrance on Division where it's one way. That sort of passageway is already narrowed by there's some yellow striping sort of just in the street bed. So we're sort of borrowing that language there. Also looking at new crosswalks in some locations. This intersection, because it's off kilter a little bit, all of those crossings are sort of diagonal. It's like a parallelogram. Thank you. So to sort of rationalize those crossings and make them shorter, we've looked at turning those crossings so that they're more perpendicular to the sidewalks, so that crossing is shorter for a pedestrian.
The crossing looks like it's about I don't know how many feet into the street. Into South Division.
So back here.
Sorry,
no, up here.
Oh, that's so it's not right at the corner of Park and North Division. It's up North Division. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, this one actually maybe it could move south a little bit, closer toward the intersection.
Yeah.
And still be still have that shorter crossing.
Yeah.
So there might be some tweaks that we can make there.
Intersection is the number one impediment to tourism in Peekskill. It is just, I think it is if we do this is like the number one thing we can do to make this safer, more inviting, more walkable.
So there's a way that you can see sort of the ideas up here where we're thinking about these intersections and about Peekskill Plaza, which Peekskill Walks had submitted. And some of the ideas there, and you can see that in the section on the bottom right hand corner of the slide. The way that we've started thinking about this project, whether this is how it's broken out in the plan or not, is that it's integrally connected with the gazebo as well, right? There's an argument that you could make that these projects, this one and the gazebo, should be one project. We can talk about whether that's the right thing to do in the plan, but if you think about the gazebo plaza, Peekskill Plaza on Division, these two intersections as really one unit. It's not just the gazebo, right? It's how the gazebo connects with the sort of flagpole plaza. It's how it extends down along Peekskill Plaza on Division. It's that intersection of South and Brown as well. And maybe this becomes not an impediment, but something that's actually an attraction, that people actually want to come to Peekskill to see. So that's how we're thinking about all of these intersections as a unit and these civic spaces as a unit. Yes.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on that, we are starting to look at these as potentially one project, those two big components, but then also this sort of larger downtown streetscape project would include some of those sort of pedestrian safety issues that are maybe in other locations, select locations around the downtown core, that would be itemized and identified. It's sort of a larger scale downtown pedestrian safety, but then this is kind of the flagship part of it. this area, these two intersections.
Is there a possibility of working in any type of loading zone in front of the Ford Piano Building? I'm a little concerned about what happens when that has tenants, because currently there is no way. You know, if we fill that up with no parking area, there's no way to get deliveries in and out of that building. So it's a little concerning.
Yeah, so details like that are helpful, right? So maybe there is, what we did do on here is carve out a small space down here for public safety vehicles to be able to pull over. Maybe we extend that another space to provide that kind of flexibility. But those are exactly the types of sort of local knowledge and details that are helpful for us to understand. And so here we wanted to show, this isn't exactly what this necessarily has to look like, but some ideas, some inspiration for us about what some of the components might be. Green infrastructure incorporated into curb extensions, seating incorporated into the Peekskill Plaza, bike racks, bike racks in certain spaces would be a great component as well. This is another project where the cost came in lower than we had expected. Looking at the nuts and bolts, we think some of the details might move a little bit, but again, we were happy to see that at least as a first pass, it was lower, not higher. So that gives us some wiggle room to work out some of the details.
Putting in the walk sign, like fixing the walk signs in Peekskill, feels like $1 million project. And bundling that into here, sort of, I have concerns about.
Well, so that's one thing that we've talked to Gene about what the specific locations are, what the specs are of the signals that they use. So from a dollar amount, it's not going to be a standalone project. It's going to be $10,000 or $20,000. It's probably a high estimate, right, for walk signals. So it's got to go in another project, and we think for the downtown this is the place to put it. But it's not that we haven't thought about it and we're not considering where they should go.
This is sort of the problem here, and before we spend all this money as a city and set ourselves up for future maintenance costs, I think we need to look at the whole concept of these bag buttons in the first place, and creating a city that prioritizes and values pedestrians means that you shouldn't have to hit this dirty, broken, out-of-the-way button for permission to cross the street. So maybe what we think about doing as a city is putting in light cycles where you automatically get a pedestrian signal, and then we take out the need for that maintenance and that piece of infrastructure, and the fact that right now the bag buttons on outside the police station at Central Nelson aren't even ADA compliant. You have to go 5 feet down a slope to access it. So maybe if we sort of change our thinking on that, we don't need to invest in, we still need the signal, the displays, but not the button part. The city doesn't have to keep maintaining that, and we actually, prioritize people. We should assume that there's going to be people at the corner waiting to cross for most of these locations. So I think we need to have that conversation as a city before
Good input, thank you. I would say, to follow on with your point, Connor, and also Bree, when you look at the profiles that we sent you on Friday, if you have specific problem intersections, I think we flagged a lot of them, but specific things that you want to be corrected or fixed, just send those along and we'll make sure that we add those to the list.
It really is. You hate to,
not even joking.
Yeah, it sounds so flippant to say, but it really is. One other note on the plaza, obviously concerns over congestion, what type of traffic impacts that would have. So I just wanted to put out there that we do have a traffic engineer who is looking into that, used county data recently, and he actually went out there and did an in-person traffic count recently. So we will have more technical, up-to-date numbers that we can provide on. He did the count, so we'll push him on that.
We've got the same county data too, but if he supplemented that one.
He felt like for some reason the data was old or something maybe, so I'm not sure, so I'll connect you on that.
Okay, so the third of these streetscape improvement projects is down on Railroad Avenue and Water Street. So again, starting at the top of the slide here, looking at that intersection of Water and Central, and how that sort of expansive intersection can be tightened down so that traffic slows down a little bit entering that intersection, crosswalks and maybe stop signs as well. Street trees along Water Street, painting a center line. That's a street that is it's too wide, or it's wider than it needs to be for two-way traffic. It's too narrow to add bike lanes, or at least a two-way bike lane. And so our thought here, and this is a relatively low dollar amount in terms of traffic calming, is it's the center line. Maybe painting in a shoulder. It might be a couple of feet on each side, but it's sort of moving the cars closer together so they move more slowly, and adding sharrows that are very visible. Oh, sharrows is it's a shared lane, so it's paint on the ground that it's sort of telling shared arrows, right? So it's telling bicyclists that they're allowed to take the full lane. It's telling drivers that they should expect to see bicycles on the roadway.
Has any consideration happened regarding spaces for picking up passengers at the train station in that area?
What the consideration has been to make sure that the area that's there remains to be there. We haven't constrained that at all.
It just seems
if there's a need for more or reconfigure,
I think it needs to be looked into. It seems to quite often be a cluster of cars that don't really know where to go and aren't sure where to pick people up. And it's people getting off the train, don't know where the car is, and there's always this hustle of craziness.
Yeah, I think the city in general needs to look at traffic situation down there. It works for no one. You're a driver, you're frustrated, the gate comes down, cars are backed up, they start driving the wrong way down Hudson at Taco Dive Bar, and people walking. It doesn't really work for anyone right now, so there's a larger part of that conversation. One other question
about the proposal, could you not just flip the bike lane and the parking to create a parking protected bike lane?
Oh, you mean the
railroad?
Yeah.
The one thing I will highlight here, the second sort of text box from the bottom here, we had seen an idea to make Railroad Avenue one-way southbound from Hudson to Weequahic. We didn't like that idea, making it one-way the full length, because then you end up with people trying to circle to get around. But there's a variation that we heard about. I think, Louis, you had initially mentioned it to me, which is if Railroad is one-way from Hudson to the train station, southbound, but Weequahic remains two-way, so you can still make that circle around the sort of train station area. And so if you end up in the wrong place, you can easily, kind of make that U-turn and circle back around. The reason to make it one way is that you end up with people leaving the train station and going up Railroad and creating congestion at the intersection with Hudson. If someone's trying to get out of the waterfront area, you want to kind of send them up Weequahic up into the downtown. So that's the reasoning behind that one-way shift. But this is, again, it's a traffic circulation question. It's not a high dollar amount, but as we're looking at this area, that was an idea that we started talking about.
The idea also was at some point in time, the business street closes down on the weekends for the restaurants. You could close down that one-way section on like a Saturday and do something down there for art or for whatever it may be.
That's a great point. So because Weequahic and the circle is now still two-way, it's not an impediment for Railroad, that section of Railroad to be closed down. Someone could still make their way down to the train station and get back up.
The amount of tourism that happens there on weekends in the spring, summer, fall is incredible. So that could be where artists would come down and set up something different than.
So from the DRI standpoint, we don't have to do all the details that we're now talking about. This is more to want to fund the amount of money to fund generally what we're doing. If it gets funded, then there's a process outside of the DRI where the city decides what they're going to do with the money, right?
Well, so, there's, we are putting as much detail into a project like this as we can, right? The city is still going to hire, you know, a civil engineer, designers, right, to figure out detail. We're at a conceptual level here. So
No, I get that. I guess what I'm asking specifically is, you're doing all that to give this state a flavor for what it is. But at the end of the day, I just want people here in the audience, and they don't ever hear us in the future, know that this isn't exactly what happens, this isn't being decided today. You're sort of deciding what's going to happen. People have input on it in the future. Exactly.
Well, so that's a great point too. Is that what we've seen in some communities is that on a major public improvement project, we're doing outreach as part of the DRI process, but the city might want to do more, right? Might want to have public meetings about the specific design of the gazebo plaza, for example. Right? So there are potentially opportunities for additional input on some of those projects.
And we've done that in prior DRI plans, where we'll give all the details that we can conceptually based on this process, but then we'll say, the city should engage in additional public meetings to further more fine-tune the details, and that has happened in prior rounds. For example, a major park, and they've done more public engagement kind of on their own. It's up to the city whether they want to hire a consultant to do that. We would want to know that and maybe add it to the cost, but the city also can just run some open meetings to further detail those projects and make sure that the public is okay with the look and the feel of it.
Getting back to South Bend, did you get the drawings from the architect that were done a couple years ago for that?
No.
There's an architect named Chris Borchardt. Do you have that, Jamie?
I don't think so.
So Chris Borchardt, CBDB Architects down in the train station, we paid him to do a study, and he had a drawing about the one-way with the crosswalk and everything.
That would be...
So if you have any trouble, get a hold of it. He's right down above the Dome Wine Store.
Chris, what was the...
Borchardt. B-O-R-C-H-A-R-D-T. CBD, yeah. CBD. He does that probably, but...
Thank you.
There's also, we're missing a little bit here, where underneath the highway, there's a large, every morning there's a lot of people who walk from Peekskill to the train station. And when you go underneath the highway, the sidewalk stops, and there's a wall here, and there's cars coming. So the pedestrians cannot see cars coming out.
The off-ramp from 9 south.
So there's probably, I don't know if there's a way to fix it, but it's definitely like, every time I walk across there, and there's a lot of traffic there, I look at that and I go, someone's gonna die someday right there.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that because, and it's surprising for drivers also.
Yeah,
so I expect people to walk out, and I think there's actually a pretty simple fix where along that sidewalk, there is a painted on the street, probably about 5-foot strip where it's just painted. And if you shifted everything over, and then outside Nunzio, same thing.
Yeah.
There's room where you can literally shift the sidewalk to your left as you're walking, towards the waterfront, and it would line it up better. It's a blind spot there.
Okay, so you...
One more thing to add here, similarly to how we may group the gazebo and the downtown streetscaping projects together, we've been thinking a little bit about grouping this project with the Central Avenue connections. It's sort of a unified project in getting people up from the waterfront, up from the train station, better connecting that whole area to downtown. And we kind of feel really strongly that you can't do one without the other. The train station area is such an important arrival point for people who are less familiar with Peekskill and also your daily commuters, that this is really important, but it's also really important to get them up the hill either on Central or South. So they kind of work hand in hand.
Yeah, so I went back to the map here to drive that point home. You can imagine if you fix up this streetscape from the train station up to the intersection of South Water and Central, but you didn't do Central, right? Then as a pedestrian or a cyclist, you're kind of stuck, right? And if you do Central Avenue, but you don't get from the train station to Central, you're still in the same position you are now, where people don't know, if they don't know the city, that there's this jewel of a corridor that you can get to. So to Susan's point, I think it's important to do the whole stretch.
Yeah, added to that, of course, is the ability for art to bring
a visual pathway also.
Yes.
Along the same route, up Central, up South, up Central. So visually, you should be able to create also.
Yeah, so there's a public art project that we'll talk about in a few minutes that has to be coordinated with the streetscape projects as well.
So the earlier point would be great to flip the parking and the bike lane to have a protected bike lane.
Just having been through a number of these processes, and they virtually all include streetscape improvements, I would just say that my observation, largely uninformed by professional costs and whatnot, I think you're getting a lot of value for these costs. I was actually very pleasantly surprised to see the costs, because you really, probably as a group, you don't want to necessarily spend a half of your DRI allotment on streetscape, and the state might not want to see that either. But this seems to be good value, and with that, I would just say, please vet the cost well, because it does look like it's very, very good value.
Yeah, I would say don't hold us to these numbers as final numbers, but we were pleasantly surprised, but I do anticipate they will go up. We hope they won't go up too much. We're trying to nail down all those details.
I just had a quick question. Wasn't there a much larger grant request for Railroad Plaza by the developer? I don't see that here. Has that been taken out?
Yeah, so that initially there was an open call submission by GDC to do Railroad Avenue for $3 million, and we thought the design wasn't. First of all, it made Railroad Avenue one way the entire way.
It was taken out.
Yeah. So we, what the sense that we had is that it's a good idea, right, to take a look at this stretch, and we sort of took a look at it with fresh eyes to sort of come up with a public benefit. So here are a couple of again sort of inspirational photos for us. The bus stop, by the way, on the top right is the county's spec bus stop shelter. The image on the bottom right is a thought about how we could look at curb extensions that don't involve concrete and curbing and redoing a bunch of drainage. So that's an idea there. The bottom left image is a thought on incorporating covered bike racks down by the train station. I don't think that there are bike racks down there at all right now, and it's a little bit of a different type of need for bike racks than if someone's in town going to the store or going to a restaurant. If someone's commuting, you might want to be out of the weather, so we think there might be a need for something like this down here. The cost here, again, the last sort of placeholder cost that we gave you was $1 million. We think this one is quite low. But this was the first cut that we got. But again, nice that it was low rather than high. But expect to see that one move a little bit.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to. I have a situation at home that's fine, but I have a husband watching a grandchild baby who's saying he needs some help. Okay. So please excuse me. I wanted to be here for as much as I could.
Okay, thank you, Marcia.
Thank you for your great work.
So the next project here is the ride trolley and bike share and car share project. This is one that we've had a number of conversations about this to try to figure out the details. This is an idea, again, as we've talked about before, that has been needed and desired for quite a long time. It's gotten a lot of support at public workshops. The details that we're trying to figure out is how can this be funded through DRI? And we're running up on some challenges so far. So that's sort of where we are. We think that there might be other funding sources, and so this is a sort of ongoing conversation that we want to continue to have and try to figure out. Number one, can we get it over the hump with DRI? If we can't, what's a way that we can recommend another path forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest stumbling blocks here are, what components are or are not eligible for DRI. Because if you remember, at its very basic element, DRI is mostly a capital project. So, the sponsor is making an argument that the app that is, a significant part of this cost is a capital project. It's sort of like the new capital. But our sense is that the state doesn't view it that way, that it's just not sort of brick and mortar hard infrastructure, and so that would not be eligible, is this the sense we're getting. So then what is eligible, it's just kind of difficult to make that, all those moving parts sort of function together to make it a DRI project, not making any value judgment over whether this is a strong project. I think you've heard a lot of interest from the public about it. It's just whether it fits the DRI program is kind of what we're running up against.
So the public interest wouldn't necessarily translate to the state funding it if it doesn't meet the criteria. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah. Even though it's a worthy project.
It's a threshold issue. Is it eligible?
I think they would probably talk about the charging, like if there's going to be charging stations for these, the bike dock sections that get bolted to the ground. There are earlier things they don't like funding things that roll.
Right, that roll, but it's possible they could fund what Bree's talking about, the infrastructure for it, but not the things that roll.
Well, so it's not as much an issue of the things that roll necessarily. We might be able to sort of further vet that and see if that, we could do something about that. The issue with the proposal was that the lion's share of the request was for the app development. And the issue with the app development is, in the state's view, that's not a capital expense. With all deference to the new generation of thinking on what a capital expense is, and also if the model doesn't prove out, then the app goes away, and $500,000 of investment is no longer in the community. The issue with sort of the rolling stock, and in essence the bikes or the trolley, if there was a sort of a backup where the city or someone else was willing to sort of take that on and operate it, should the venture not work out, that would certainly be more supportive of doing so. But if it was just this venture, it's a little bit of an unproven model. So there's a significant investment there, which has some questions, as Simon was pointing out.
Yeah, in other words, what is hopefully if it gets funded and it works, but if it gets funded and it doesn't work, and the city owns the trolley and the bikes, what is the city going to do with the trolley and the bikes in a few years? And if there was an answer for that, then we could make the case to the state. But lacking that, it's a harder sell.
With all these new downtown buildings coming on, couldn't we get some of the building owners to pay for some of the service? Because this trolley is normally used on the weekends and after hours. Why couldn't some of these, like Ginsburg spends a fortune, Riverbend, they all spend a lot of money on their own system. Why couldn't this be part of, the building owner as an amenity to their tenants would say, I'm going to have a free trolley to the train station.
So now you're talking about, maybe this goes in the plan as recommended for other funding sources, and that's one of the other ways to get it funded, right? I think that's where that is headed, right? It's not.
They'd save money in the long run if they didn't have to each have their own driver, their own van.
Exactly. Yeah. And by the way, there are others, right? So there's a program that NYSERDA runs called the Truck Voucher Incentive Program that is specifically targeted for electric vehicles. I think we had identified a few. I think there might be other avenues through state funding to get an app funded, just not DRI. So there are things like that we can look at. I think that if there's a way that this process has advanced this project forward, even if it doesn't make the DRI plan, I think that's still positive.
The hack for the bikes and stuff would be to wait until jump bikes show up somewhere in New York City, and then 100 people go down to New York and ride them up to Peekskill and leave them here.
There you go.
And then if we keep doing that, there becomes a market.
There's your role as well.
Like, no, that's how it works. Like, they're like, Peekskill and Peekskill want these.
Do the batteries,
money off them.
will the battery make it all the way from New York City?
Up and down. We'll put them in vans, whatever.
Okay, so the next one here is the Paramount Theater. The Paramount Theater is one that we've done some follow-up, but to be honest, there's a lot of detail in this project already. It's got a good operator. It's got a good use case for it. They're working with an architect. We feel pretty good about the cost estimates. So I don't know. They've got some new renderings here, which weren't in the initial submission that some of you may not have seen. The one that I like in particular is on the top left here. You see an existing outside alley, and the one in the top middle is a sort of a renovation of that outdoor area, which would be kind of a nice change there. So, you know, we from a DRI standpoint, we think this has you know, a lot of strength to it. The next one is Peekskill Art and Media Center. You know, a similar narrative, right? It's had a lot of detail from the beginning. This one is in an interesting place. I want to provide a little bit of an update on this one, which is that on the one hand, it's strong in the sense that it's already going through approvals, and from the state standpoint, you know, you can't be much more shovel ready than that. The question that we had is, well, does this really need DRI funding, right? It's broken out into 2 phases, and so we wanted to understand what's going to happen if you don't get DRI funding. And the response that we got is that, you know, essentially phase 1 is funded, phase 2 is not. So, but for DRI funding, phase 2 has to go through another funding round. That might take a few years. That might not come through, right? So that's sort of the question about how do you justify DRI funding here? Is that the full scope of the project is either substantially delayed or at risk without DRI funds. Any comments, questions here?
Well, except that it's been clear to us that if the project is going to happen, it was not going to be eligible, potentially.
Well, that was the question that we had, right? So the phase 1 is not what they're asking for money for. Right. It's the phase 2.
Right.
The phase 2...
Which they've committed to make it happen. It just may take longer without the funding. Right.
If it doesn't get funded, my sense is that it doesn't happen. The phase 1 can exist without the phase 2, but the full project in its totality is stronger. So the next one, as Joe mentioned before, is the coordinated public art installations. This is a series of murals and installations sponsored by the Peekskill Arts Alliance. It's light sculptures sponsored by HV Mocha, and the 5 arches on Route 9, which you see on the bottom left up here, sponsored by a couple of local artists, including Christine Dalton. And as I mentioned before, it's critical for this to be coordinated with the streetscape improvement projects. And in fact, part of it has been planned in order to be a part of drawing people from downtown along Railroad and South Water Street onto Central Avenue with these installations and these light sculptures. So we think those are a nice companion. These groups have worked very well together and with us to look at how we can make this more cost efficient. This is something that we were getting a message from the state that the initial cost a DRI ask was a little high from their standpoint for a public art project. So they've been great partners so far in making sure that we bring this project in a way that we think is as strong as it can be.
Any of these slots, could that be allocated to Peekskill of school district pictures of some of our students? I see a lot of them, and I know there was a talk about it in the past, so I don't know if you can answer to that. Like pictures of our students, perhaps, just 1 or 2 going down to showcase, what our students are doing.
Yeah, so the one thing I didn't mention is that for the light sculptures and for the PAA component, they would be run through an RFP process. So each of these individual sites, there's a couple of dozen of them, would have a sort of a competitive process for it. One thing that we can maybe talk about is having a focus for some of the sites on student artists, which getting a positive reaction about right here. So.
We had talked about actually doing some billboards around Peekskill and funding them out of businesses that showed kids who graduated from high school going to Harvard or going in the military, and just we had a realtors meeting last year with the superintendent, and he talked to the realtors and said no more of this telling people that the Peekskill schools suck and to go to Larchmont or go to Irvington, and it makes sense, but, you know, there's so many great things happening if we started making it aware that, you know, 10 kids went here, so, but that could be, if we had the locations that we could raise money privately for that, also with the DRI funds. It's just a place to, you know, so kids had an incentive to, you know, go.
We gotta get art in all the arches that don't
Yeah.
have art.
And the one thing to follow up on this project is that specific locations have been identified, and that'll be one of the graphics that is in the plan, is a map that shows, you know, here's this installation, here's this light, and it's not that every specific work of art has been determined, but the locations have been pretty carefully thought out in terms of, you know, that thematic pathway up from the railroad station and throughout downtown.
So the next one is the Peekskill Coffee House Roaster. We talked about this last month, and I think the update sort of happened during that meeting. So number one, this is quite a bit outside of the DRI boundary. And number two, the sense that we got at the last meeting was that there might be other funding avenues for this type of project through ESD. So we've connected Sunny with ESD directly, and we think that conversation is ongoing. We think this would have been a tough boundary change to justify. So the next project here is the Peekskill Pavilion Farmers Market structure. This is another one that's had some questions. We've been going back and forth with the project sponsor here. I'm trying to, you know, sort of try to get as much detail as we could. I think the key, and Susan mentioned, we also had a conversation with the Common Council when we briefed them at the beginning of this month. The key threshold issue here from a DRI standpoint is that they've identified other funding sources to fill in that gap, but they're funding sources that they've either not yet applied for or not yet heard back about. And so from the state standpoint, that's a very tricky thing, because, and from your standpoint as well, because if you put a project in the plan that's dependent upon other funding sources, and it doesn't get those funding sources, the state's in a tough spot to award DRI funds, because then, say those other sources don't come through, the project doesn't happen, and now you've left money on the table, right? So it's got a tough threshold in terms of those other funding sources. The cost, some of the project details are sort of changing. The last time we had conversations about this, so we're not certain about the cost estimates. So it's got some other questions as well.
We think they're low.
We need the cost estimates.
I'm looking at what you sent out on Friday. There's 1.5 in there for design that's not currently in the number, correct?
Yeah.
So this is over a $2 million project on as they're proposing.
I'm not. So that was. We're not certain about that 1.5. Yeah, it was a question that we asked, so we hadn't. We didn't get an answer on that. Okay. Next one is the HRH Care Heritage Library and Cultural Center. We think this is a nice, sort of a nice project. It serves an underserved community, relatively small DRI request. We need to do a little bit of follow-up, so we'll reach out to Jeanette and her team. We want to understand a little bit more about what's in the gallery there now. How is this substantially different, to make sure that we know the transformative impacts. But overall, we think it's a nice addition to that area. So it's just some questions that we need to follow up on. Now the gazebo area improvements. We talked about this a little bit on the discussion about the Peekskill Plaza. The key here is that this is such a critical civic space for downtown Peekskill. We want to make it as much as it can be. Our architects and landscape architects are working through very early design concepts based on some of the conversations at the public workshop. You see the sort of latest concepts here, but these are a work in progress. But you see some of the key elements, a shade structure, so that you've got some kind of cover like the gazebo, but it doesn't have to be that same shape necessarily. There's topography, right? There's a slope there, so we need to figure out how to work through that slope. And so there's a lot of examples where you can use stairs as also seating elements, so they can be used for multiple purposes. And the bottom point here, again, ties into one of the earlier projects, is building out that curb, getting that green infrastructure built in along Division Street.
I'll just make the point that if you can't handle stairs from a mobility standpoint, it's also flat on the, I guess that's the right side, as it currently is. So you could come flat into the gazebo area, and then actually up there, no, in the gray box, underneath the shade structure, basically. If you were in a wheelchair, for example, yep, it would be flat at that part.
So this is one where there seems to be a proposal for a design, and there's a cost estimate associated with it. So in the context of sort of the discussion about, you know, how defined does it have to be in post potential award, is there flexibility in design? And the answer is yes, there is, but here it strikes me that if you make a significant departure, you have to be sure that you're within budget. So if there's certain things that you think about here that aren't represented, that might substantially impact cost, I think that's something you should throw into the mix for consideration so the budget can get adjusted so that there's that kind of flexibility.
I was not a fan of this project until I saw this right here, because I like the gazebo as it is. But having been to all the events that happened where we shut down the center of Peekskill for like New Year's Eve, it's a really special party in Peekskill, and something like this turns the gazebo from like a pretty awkward zone in those times where people, it's like just kind of awkward, to like almost like a grandstand experience. And then there's the pizza place on the other side, and all the restaurants there. I could imagine this. This picture turns it around.
Good. That's great.
The only question I have is, where's the pizza delivery guy gonna park his car now?
If people wanted like art to be incorporated, should that specifically go into this piece, or?
Well, it's just a budget. It's just a budget thing, so you can look at what's included in the budget, and if there's something substantial. I wouldn't think that public art necessarily would be all that substantial, but if there's some other element, and I don't know what that element might be here, that you would want to have budget flexibility to capture it in design if that could be foreseen.
Yeah, I think I think the way to think about it is if there are bells and whistles, right? It's not just I like this design or a slightly different design would be better. If there's anything else that we want to add in here that you think is an important component that's going to be a cost item, let us know so that we can make sure to include it.
Are the green circles other shelters, or are those trees?
Those are meant to be trees.
I just think that this is a spot where everybody hangs out and watches all the events that happen in downtown Peekskill when we shut down Peekskill. If you have trees there, it's going to block and make us not, I mean, I love trees, more trees.
Right.
But I probably wouldn't put them right there.
It should be more of an open space.
Yeah.
So maybe bike parking.
Sure. Yep.
And art.
Is this something that you guys are going to think about rendering?
Yeah.
Yeah, that elevation is really.
What would happen to the gazebo?
People are going to care about this.
I mean, like, look, right now having an enclosed space with no benches in the middle of town makes no sense. But could it be moved? Could it be put somewhere else? Could it have benches put in it, be put somewhere else? Or?
One of the things about trees, backing up a moment. We're doing one of these in Nourishell now, and every time we look at design, we do less and less trees because people want to be able to have the space be flexible and be able to be used for many, many different things. So like we had a fountain, we've gone from a fountain to having inset water so that you don't have to have it be on. Like just, if it's really going to be successful, it's going to get used for a million different things. So I think you can do some plantings, but they need to be done in a way where they don't interfere with how the space might be used.
Yeah.
One other thing. In terms of speaking about trees, I can just cite in front of the health center on Main Street with the amount of trees, and then the roots kick up and all the pavers are all kicked up or so forth. Or you've got to have sufficient amount of room around the tree bed, which will just be taking up more space that you don't really have in that gazebo area.
To Bill's point, these spaces, whether it's the plaza or the gazebo or any of these spaces, need flexibility to work.
We have a lot of parades and stuff like that, and public events and stuff like that.
So here, again, these are, don't have to be exactly what it looks like, but some inspirational images of what some different shade structures could be, some different types of sort of stair structures that can also be used for seating. So there's some models that designers can look at to help guide what direction this is going.
Are you comfortable with this number in terms of cost? Because
No.
it looks
No, it's low. Yeah, this one's low.
How big's the area, what's the square footage of the area?
Not off the top of my head. Yeah, no, this is one, so, again, we kind of wanted to show you all the latest that we got, but this is the one that was a red flag for us. We know this one's gonna go up, but the placeholder that we had here was also $1 million, right? So there's room for this to move up.
We debated showing you these numbers, but we wanted to show you that there is a progression happening, and I mean, they are backed up by details. We just think the details need to be refined. So this is a number that we definitely think is going to go up.
Okay, yeah, so Fleischman we talked about quite a bit. This one hasn't changed. This is one where, as you all know, the city got some funding for phase 1. This would allow for phase 2 to happen all at the same time. A great project to bring in tourism on the edge of the downtown, connect with other events along the waterfront as well.
I'd just like to add that also the phase 2 upgrades the park and the parking. And parking will become very important because unless you go to the right to Charles Point and you want to come into the city, the tour operators themselves might want some transport, small bus transport to bring people to downtown, which we would like also.
That's a great point. Okay, so the next one here is the Community Paddling and Environmental Education Center. This is one that we've talked about with Common Council. We've talked about with the project sponsor, so the Hudson Valley H2O who submitted the idea. We had a conversation with Scenic Hudson as well. This is, you can see on the map up here on the left about where this will be located. In Peekskill Landing, adjacent to the existing floating dock. That particular site it's part of an area that both the city and Scenic Hudson have a stake in. So we wanted to make sure Scenic Hudson was on board. They love the idea of having a sort of a kayak facility similar to what Beacon has in Long Dock Park. That's essentially the vision here. That's what the photos are at the bottom. It's a place where HVH2O or some group like that could operate this sort of nonprofit paddling education center, environmental education center, that could also have space for individuals to rent, to store a kayak or a canoe in season, stand-up paddleboard. So, Scenic Hudson saw this as a way to add a new water-dependent use to the waterfront. It was in keeping with what they had in mind when they were involved in building that park. So it had some support. We think the council liked the idea. The other important thing that we learned from Scenic Hudson and talking with the city about this as well is that this cost is low. This was the cost submitted by HVH2O. We got a little bit more detail from them actually just today, not specific numbers, but about what the sort of building components might be. And so this is one that we need to dig into more and understand that if this is going to happen, the cost is going to be higher, maybe double. So.
Who's something Scenic Hudson might fund?
I don't think so. We can ask them that. But they seem very enthusiastic about the idea of DRI funds going toward the project. Oh yeah, so the other thing here is that this would be a city-sponsored project. It wouldn't be sponsored by the nonprofit. And so what that means is that the city can put criteria on whatever that agreement is with whoever's operating, if it's H2H2O or someone else, whoever's operating out of that space. And one of the key things that we heard, really two things that we've heard from the Common Council and Scenic Hudson as well, is that the floating dock remain open to the public, right? So it's not private to whoever the operator is, and also that it's only open to non-motorized boats, right? So it's kayaks, it's paddle boards, it's canoes, and that sort of thing.
I think the contract is expired with Scenic Hudson in terms of land ownership. It is city property, and the city has responsibility for the property today. There was an original agreement.
For part of the property, yeah.
Conservation
Yeah.
easement. Easement from St. Hudson.
As a community, we're not great about putting these docks in every year. Last year, they went in very, very late in the summer. So it does require on our part as a community to get those docks in.
Well, in that sense, without knowing all the details, it might help to have an operator who's a concessionaire, who's got, who's now got a stake in making sure that they're able to operate.
It was broken last year.
It was broken.
The piles needed to be replaced. Yeah.
So in any case, seems like a good project. It still has some questions that we need to answer.
Did we skip over the construction of this one here, totally?
I talked about it briefly. Do you have questions about it? Okay, so the next one here is Pugsley Park. So we've got a site plan here that shows, again, sort of an initial design concept, adding in sort of a plaza area, seating areas, keeping the trees that are there, adding some other trees, having some kind of garden space, perennial garden or sort of native plants in the park. Coordinating with the public art project as well. So this is one where it's sort of got some different components that we've added in. Jumping to the next slide, importantly, as Susan mentioned before, this is one where the cost came in higher than we expected. So we're going to look at some of the details and see, if there's an opportunity to bring this down, or maybe, maybe we, collectively like some of the components that are added to try to activate that park, and maybe it's worth investing more. So that's something that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, the biggest cost driver here is pavers, which are expensive, I guess, and there's a lot of area here that's shown as being sort of some type of paver. So we may shrink that a little bit, tweak the design, kind of follow up with the designer, and get a sense of some other options. But there's a lot of good things here. It's just it came in higher.
Pugsley Park is kind of awkward. It doesn't really go between. It goes between a community area and the city, but there's multiple ways. It's not like a primary walkway. I think that for me, the thing that would sell me on this is if some private donor donated a giant orange Alexander Calder artwork or something that would make it a destination rather than a walkway. Is that? I know there were issues with what we could put in there based on the original plan.
Yeah. So this, as I mentioned, this has to be coordinated also with the public art projects. There are two installations that they've anticipated here. One light sculpture, and then another sort of a series of panels. I had an image of it before. That's between Pugsley and the vacant lot next to it. That creates some visual interest there. But not just with art, but also these other components that you see a little bit in the site plan here. That's exactly what we're thinking about, is that you can still use it as a pass-through, but it's also a place to go. Right? It's also something that you want to go and stay in. Right?
The one thing that struck us when we first visited this park, because Main Street can get kind of noisy, it's a truck route, but the second you kind of step a few feet into the park, it's pretty quiet. It's kind of a nice little respite. there's a lot that can be done to make it more attractive and more inviting, but that is kind of a nice little place in Peekskill. And so between the art and the improvements here, we think it can be more than just a pass-through.
Okay, so the next one here is the Downtown Revitalization Fund. This is that $600,000 set aside that can be used for smaller scale projects, sort of not long-term, right? Still relatively short-term, but it could go toward facade improvements, storefront improvements, small business, sort of retail storefront improvements. I mentioned earlier that there's the possibility for something like a solar incentive program. The one thing that we need to talk about a little bit here is the last item on the list on the right side of the page, is what the match requirement is. Other communities that we've worked with have used this fund, but also as a way to continue to get private leverage, so you're not giving someone 100% of the project cost. The question is what that match is, and what form it takes, right? So other communities that we've worked with have done a 50-50 match. It doesn't have to be what the number is. It could be higher, it could be lower. But that's I think what each of our communities has landed on.
You know, one question that came up in the Business Owners Roundtable that a member, a person who was there spoke up about was, is a 50-50 match where the business owner has to pony up cash, essentially 50%. Is that a deterrent? And this person basically said it would be for many businesses in downtown Peekskill that are currently, pretty tight on their margins. And so I think it's an open question to you as a committee. Would you be okay with some other form for the match? Like say they get other funding, perhaps from the county, or if there's an IDA funding, that's how they make up the match. It doesn't necessarily have to come from their savings or a bank loan or something like that. It's an open question. I think it's a balance that you want to strike of making sure that this is a fund that can be accessed by by your businesses here and potential future businesses, but also someone should ideally have some skin in the game, right? They should bring something to the table. So we promise we bring it to the committee and talk about kind of how you feel about that match, both the percentage and then what that match is. Is it a cash or is it other funding that they can bring?
You're talking about, it's going to be the property owner, not the business owner, right? Is it put money into the storefront?
Well, I think it depends on the nature of the improvement. And that would have to be worked out between the property owner and the business.
I mean, if a property owner, most is going to do it, they're going to be able to,
they could probably do it. They'd be in a different position than
a 50-50 is very fair if it's, property owner, but most business owners are not going to invest $100,000 for a storefront when they own the building in Peekskill.
There in a way there's two different types of facade or storefront improvements. One is that it's on the exterior of the building and it's sort of appreciating the asset. The other is that it contributes to the interior fit out tenant improvement, which the property owner probably isn't going to pay for. So that might be a smaller dollar amount to fix up a retail store, but I think that could be potentially eligible even for a business owner, right, who doesn't own the building.
For internal improvement, sure.
Yeah, so it may not have to be the property owner, it could be the business owner inside.
Who runs this?
So it would be run by either the city, an IDA, some other sort of public entity locally.
That's my issue as well, is we don't know who manages this. This could be bundled into the Latino Business Owners Fund as well, if there was good representation for whoever runs it. This could go to $850,000 with that kind of idea. But someone's going to have to step up or be delegated.
So it will be it's going to be the city. It's going to be a public entity, and that will be identified in the plan. It's not going to go into the plan with that being an open question.
I also would love to see, rather than existing businesses, I would love to see a lot. We need more jobs in Peekskill, and I would love to see this go towards like startup expenses. And we have restaurants, but I'd love to see us investing in other kind of businesses that could potentially bring in money through bigger, like having internet businesses or things where they could pull in money a variety of businesses besides just storefront businesses in Peekskill to generate revenue for the.
So that being said, we couldn't sit down with the committee and identify what businesses we want to bring to Peekskill and then try to incentivize that? So like what are you saying? You know, we don't need any more restaurants or hair salons or, you know, bodegas. We need some creative businesses that'll give new jobs to the people in Peekskill.
Right, I mean, I think the benefit of it being locally managed, which we try to impart to the Business Owners Roundtable, and I think it is an actual benefit, is that you can set some of the criteria. And so one of the things that we've been talking about, and I've heard a great deal of interest at the public workshop several times, that people want whatever the jobs are that come out of this, whether it's, you know, permanent jobs, but also the jobs of actually doing these improvements, they want them to go to Peekskill residents. So, you know, we can't necessarily mandate that, but that could be a criteria of this fund, that there's a preference for local hiring. There already is going to be, as I understand it, Dave, MWB requirements for all of these projects from the state's perspective, but as the city who's managing this fund, you could also have other standards, and the city has experience in that type of program through the facade improvement program that it's already managed in the past. So it's something to keep in mind, and you as a committee, we don't have to decide tonight, but maybe give some thought to it, and if you have some ideas, send them our way, because I know it's getting a little bit late, about the types of things that you'd like to specify in this program. You know, local hiring, types of businesses that you want to encourage, the types of activities that are components of this fund. That's all right for you as a committee to discuss.
So if you have, there's a new working committee was running this, you could say to that committee, 50% match unless you can then demonstrate you're bringing in jobs, in which case that's flexible. Like that would sort of be a good way to handle it. The problem is, again, who's managing, who's looking at that, evaluating?
Yeah, it's going to be the city and probably needs to work.
You have another hat?
In some way, shape, or form.
I would just add here that the state's experience with funds, not across the board, but it's certainly enough to be a point of discussion, is that more often than we would like, the funds are struggling with demand. So there's often a desire to use a fund to do something that the committee or the community at large would like to see, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's an immediate demand for it. So as with all these projects, we're looking to deploy the money in a fairly efficient way, you know, in a couple of years, and so it's, for the funds, it's very helpful if there's some support in the profile that demonstrates the need. So when we get into things that are a little bit more, I guess, less defined, less known, but desired, it becomes a little bit harder to implement.
Yeah, and so I'm glad Dave raised that, because it reminds me that there's some other things that we can highlight here, which is that we talked about, I think last month, there were a couple of projects that we thought might be more appropriate for the fund. So that's some interest, right? That's demonstrated interest that we can look to. And also the city has done some outreach, kind of in coordination with us for this very reason, to get a sense for, it was in particular on South Street, I believe, of the property owners on South Street, who would be interested, who would be able to put up some funding, and there was some interest demonstrated. So that's a good sign that exists. The other thing I want to mention, this is a conversation that I just had earlier today or yesterday. This week, it was today, with a sort of county economic development director in a DRI community that we worked with a couple of years ago in Watkins Glen. And one of the eligible activities in the fund there was renovating existing buildings for new residential units. And one of the criteria that we put in there was that they had to be for long-term rentals. Watkins Glen has an issue with short-term rentals, Airbnb, squeezing the housing stock. And this criteria for long-term rentals, not using it for short-term rentals and Airbnb, was plainly spelled out. And once they got down the path of working with these property owners and saw their applications, site plan approvals, and so on, a lot of them still wanted to do short-term rentals, and they told these property owners, no, you can't do that. And they said, okay, then we don't want the money. And they walked away. So that's sort of also getting Dave's point about making sure that demand is there. Yeah. It's also an argument for the fund not just being about one thing. It's not just about facades, it's not just about storefronts, it's not just about tenant fit out. If it's about a few different things, we've checked on some of the demands, say some of that doesn't come through, there's a lot of different avenues, there's a lot of diversity for where those funds could go.
I mean, to me, this only makes sense if we bookmark like 100K of it for somebody to manage it. Because Gene, you're busy, and your team is throttled. And we, like our city, I don't see us having the bandwidth to add like a full-time job of managing 600K over a year.
Also, just to clarify that the state limits the sort of administration on that to 10%, so you get 60K.
Okay.
It's something.
But it is the only project that you're allowed to have administrative fees that I'm aware of.
Correct, right. Just one other thing to clarify, in the slide here, it shows other funding of 600,000. That's sort of it's a placeholder for a match.
It's
right?
presuming that match, right? So if the match that you all settle on is higher, then that number goes up. If it's lower, then that number goes down.
Right? The other way that could happen, although I don't think it's really on the table, is if the city or the IDA had funds and they wanted to make a state contribution of 600,000, they wanted to make that bigger, they could come to the table and say, we want to have $1 million fund and we're going to put in 400,000. But I don't think that's being discussed.
Our budget's really tight in this town.
Okay, so the next one is...
Real quick, I'm shameless plug that IDA are looking for more members too. So if anyone is interested, they're looking for more members to join that board. There are vacancies. IDA.
So the next project is Monument Park. This is one that came to us through some of the outreach that we've done, and so we've added this as a project, but we've been talking about this at least since the last public workshop. New streetlights, the new bus stop shelter. Susan talked about some of the challenges there before. Adding some perennial plantings and benches, and in particular uplighting. There's a nice tree cover there, and so we thought maybe not having not just street lights that are sort of hidden up in the tree cover, but lights down on the ground so that you can really see the sidewalk and pathways, and also the monuments.
Yeah, we drove by there tonight, and it is dark. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more thing. This is a cost number that actually I think is fairly close to what it will be. And it includes, I think the cost for the bus shelter here was $20,000, I was assuming a really high-end bus shelter, so it's probably a little bit lower than that. So this might even come down just a little bit.
This is part of Peekskill.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're taking this into consideration because we do have our school on Veterans Day that go out there, our school band plays over there, so in the park. And one of the times, so 2 events that our band actually goes and plays. So that would be great if something can be done with that.
Great, thank you.
This is the final goal.
Okay, goal 5. We made it. Okay, so the first one, 41 North Division Street. This is one that we've talked about at every meeting. Another one that's got a lot of details filled in. The sort of 2 benefits here. One is adding the residential in the downtown, but the component that requires the DRI funding is relocating Hudson Valley Mocha from outside of the downtown into the center. This, it's another one. Every time we're in town, we drive through that intersection and really think about how much of an impact that would have to have an anchor art museum right in the downtown. So the next one, another high priority project that we've been talking about throughout the process. Boys and Girls Club of Northern Westchester opening a branch in partnership with the Kiley Center. We've been in conversation with Bill and Eliza from Boys and Girls Club to sort of figure out some of the details and make sure everything is here that we need.
I mean, just so you're all aware, there is an issue here with the alternate funding. There is currently a potential funding gap in terms of this project sponsor thought that the money was coming from one state agency and it's a little bit less certain. But we are working through that. We're working on it. We're working with the state very closely. Megan Taylor is not here tonight, but she's been involved in those conversations. So, we're still very hopeful that that funding will be adjusted. There is a possibility that the DRI ask might need to come up a little bit if that other state funding, doesn't totally pan out, as we hope it will be. So stay tuned. This is still very much in the mix, and we're working on that with the state.
Okay, so the next one is the 100 Steps restoration as a component of residential development along Central Avenue and South Street. There's one update that we got on this one just today, which is that the DRI request was reduced a little bit from 1.5 million to $1,161,000. This would be building a connection, sort of a stairway from Central Avenue up to South Street. It connects those two buildings. It also connects the streets. It also has a sort of a platform in the middle with a small sculpture garden. So that's the detail. The key question for us, I think, is the cost effectiveness. We had asked for the cost to come down. We were hoping that it would come down a little bit more, but that's where this one stands as of today.
How much of this would actually include like a public park element, and how much is it just steps?
So you can see a little bit of it here. I'm sorry the drawing isn't more clear, but it's if you're on Central here at the top, right, coming up the steps, and then this section here is that sculpture garden area on that flat area, and then the steps come up the rest of the way up to South.
Is there steps there now?
No, there's a hillside. There's 3 steps. There's like 4 steps you can see.
Yeah.
Central.
It's like a path.
Yeah. But it doesn't connect all the way up currently.
No, but it's all historical.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, accessibility, mobility, all about it, $1 million for a staircase. But if we're looking at it as $1 million for a public park, something like that. So,
right.
Yep. Just a little, trying to understand this first. Is this across from Leggy? Is that where this is?
Yeah. Well, the building that you're seeing, that big gray building, is across from Letty, and then the stairway is kind of up a little bit east of that, going up Central.
So this is basically a private development that
Correct.
is looking for $1,160,000 to be viable?
Part of it is on public land, as I understand that.
Yeah, the other thing to understand about this is that he has been before the Common Council a couple of times. I haven't been there when he's presented, but the Common Council, I understand, has had some questions. He's come back a couple of times, and there's a threshold that's separate from DRI, which is the city going to approve sale of public land and some of the other approvals that the developer needs. If we get more information about that between now and next month, that we know that this is a firmer project. If we don't, then it remains a bit of a question mark from that standpoint.
he's building this either way?
Not necessarily.
Like his buildings.
He's got to get approval.
It doesn't depend on the stairs, though, right? Yeah.
But this is something where the developer is going to build a number of units. Are they rental units or for sale? Rentals. And so if you're spending $60 million, you've probably got funders, and you're looking to pull in, I don't know, $10 million a year, $20 million a year in rental fees? Am I making that up?
Yes.
What do you get if you do? I've never built apartment buildings.
It's 250 units between the two of them, approximately.
Okay. So $250K a month theoretically is what you're bringing in. So I think you're at
Not my project.
2.5.
I don't really understand the private development seeking this kind of money. So I'm not trying to actually understand what's the hook. Why would this be funded by DRI? I don't actually understand.
I think it was one of those opportunities to just enhance the project that they're already working on. It was the timing of the DRI. Yeah, that's what I personally think. And also, it's supposed to be like historic. So you have this beautiful.
When someone falls down the stairs, how do we get them? That's a steep, right?
Gene, can you add some context? Does the project depend upon this funding? Could it proceed without it?
That's what it sounds like. The project has been discussed for about 2 years, and it started out small. It couldn't be funded small, so it increased to a larger building, then it increased to 2 says funding, and you know, Bill, that you need a certain threshold in order to get financing and funding. So he claims there is a gap, still a gap in the project.
All I'm saying, just so, I'm fine with it if it's a public benefit. I just want to know if the public benefit is that's $1,160,000.
We have the same question.
Yeah.
A staircase doesn't equal 10% of the DRI.
We put an easy pass on it, we collect money and we can pay for it.
Okay.
So the next one is the Scattered Sites project on North Division Street. This is both renovating two existing buildings. You can see them on the photos on the bottom left and in the bottom middle. And it's also new construction on two vacant sites on North Division Street. We've had some follow-up with this property owner or this project sponsor. I think one of the questions is the DRI ask. Asking 50-50 for a $100,000 facade improvement, I think is a little different from asking for 50-50 for a $3 million project and getting 15% of the DRI. The other question was about how transformative is the renovation of the existing buildings, which already have tenants, maybe not so much, versus the benefit of having new affordable housing in new construction, a little bit easier to make that case. She seems open to the idea of trimming the project back and having it only about the new construction. I think that it would still be 50-50. We haven't asked that follow-up question yet, but that's where we are as far as follow-up on this one.
Are the facades really bad?
The facades need work, but if it's just about the facades, then maybe that gets kicked into the fund.
How many units is it?
I believe it's about 12 residential units total, and it's also ground floor commercial and retail.
And is she assuming she's getting money, or they're assuming getting money from the county as part of this, and the other funding?
I don't believe so. I think it's all private financing.
Yeah, if you want to call me and just talk to them, and maybe it'll help verify the source of dollars.
Okay.
We could reduce the DRI.
Sure. So the next one is the field library. This is another one where we've done quite a bit of follow-up. I would say sort of earlier on in the process, this lacked a lot of details that made it not quite DRI ready. They're working on it. They've provided a more specific, more detailed architectural program, which I think we included in the latest version of the project profiles. Also a sort of more specific statement of what the needs are, which helped us better understand what the benefits are that could be provided. I think there's a lot of support for this. We've talked about the council with us as well. There's a lot of support for something like this happening. The big sort of kind of two hurdles right now. One is getting a more specific cost estimate. They've started talking with an architect to get conceptual drawings that could be used in order to develop a more detailed cost estimate. And the other is, the other funding here would be coming from a bond by the city. And so the question is, how much action can the city take in the next month and a half in order to firm up that sort of interest or commitment in doing that? It's not up to me, but that's sort of where this project stands. I think the big picture is, it's a great project. It's an important need for the city and for the downtown. This is another one where, again, the library is working. We've been in discussions with them to try to figure out what they can do to get the information that they would need for this to feel like it was more DRI ready. If it doesn't get there, then I think we want to use the DRI plan however we can to make sure that this can get some other funds in the future. Okay, so this next one is the community solar project. This would be putting solar panels on top of the James Street garage, using the revenue generated to fund future community development projects. It's a relatively small DRI request. We've just got some new updates today from the project sponsor. They think there might be other ways that something like this could be funded. We need to follow up with them and see.
if this is something that remains on the list, or maybe there's another avenue for this to proceed.
Yeah, we literally got this about half an hour before we left, so we really couldn't digest it, but it seemed like the sponsor was sort of opening the door to, potentially seeking other funding, or even going into the fund if the fund covered, solar panels. They kind of raised that possibility. So I think there's some acknowledgement that, that maybe there's other funding sources available. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more on the details.
I'm sorry, does this take away parking spaces?
No, it's a canopy above.
It's a new roof that's.
It's not a roof. It's like a canopy above. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's also shade. It's also protection from the weather. So there's some other benefits.
One of the challenges here is that so I've got solar on one of my buildings, and when you hook up to the mains with Con Ed, the amount of you actually don't make money. You reduce your costs, and there's very little transparency into what you're saving, and they will never give you money, as far as I can tell. So the idea that this will generate funds, realistically, if there's something I don't know, I would love that, because I love the idea of literally making solar panels make money for the community. But I think that it has to be validated, because this would be something Con Ed's not going to.
So how big a system is this? How many kW is this?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I mean, if it's a decent sized system, the companies will pay for it. It's happening.
So the one thing I'll say, and this is one where the details are very sort of very intricate. They've done this before. They've done this in Brooklyn, so it's a model that seems like it's workable. They seem to know what they're doing. So it's one that we hope to continue to learn more about and understand better, so that we can kind of sell it more.
We'll withdraw skepticism.
But I don't think the issue here is that they don't have the experience. I think they know what they're doing.
Great. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so the last project is this is relatively new, although it's not new since the last public workshop. This was on the boards at the public workshop. This involves 3 different properties. 982 Main is the location of the existing Save More Auto Parts store. That would relocate to 1022 Main, where the Salvation Army is currently located. And it would also include funds to put in a parking lot in that current vacant lot right next to Pleasant Park. The parking lot would serve the business. Potentially be available for shared parking when the business is not in operation, but during business hours, it would be for the business there at the Save More Auto Parts at that new location. Some of the questions that we have here are the amount of private leverage. It's relatively low. Is it transformative, right? What kind of benefit is it going to have for the downtown? Yes.
What was that? What you said?
Yeah. Are they going to swap?
One thing about parking is it seems like the study that the city did show that Peekskill has enough parking. It's not always utilized well. People don't know where it is. They don't know that they're allowed parking in the garage. I can see this being another lot where it's for the business and then it's open public at night, but no one knows and it's never used. So just a concern. We need to utilize our parking better here.
Can the DRI funds be used to buy the parking lot for the city?
DRI funds cannot be used for property acquisition.
Or for parking alone.
Or for parking.
Yeah.
And this is one of the few projects that actually offer additional parking. So looking at, I was able to speak to the sponsor, and looking at, I want to say about 28 parking spaces, which they would probably utilize maybe like 8 to 10 during the day. But after hours, it'd be just like everywhere else. It'd be open to the public. And with, we did do the study, and there is available parking, but this will bring additional parking to that side of the area. People who utilize like the Iron Vine and the other places on that side of Peekskill, this could be a benefit. And also, when we talk about parking as we look at the streetscapes and the wayfinding, if there's a way to put available parking in certain areas, as far as the signage goes, this would be just in addition to that, you know. I know that staff, Jean and her department, and all of the staff are working on creating a more creative way to showcase the parking in the city of Peekskill, but I'm always for parking. I mean, when we look at like Division Street during the winter months when it snows, you know, the brand new artist lofts there, that we got to keep them in mind as well. And this is literally a block and a half away from where they are. So it's just something that I would just consider.
I'd be curious to know what the capacity raise at James Street Garage, which is not very far from there.
Yeah, I mean, to date, that business owner has fenced off that parking that's next to the Salvation Army. I mean, I know it's not an improved parking lot at this point, but it has not been opening it up to the public.
It's a vacant lot.
They've been using it for parking themselves.
This project has it's not a matched fund, so this is the DRI paying for the renovation of the majority of two commercial properties and a parking lot, with just getting after-hours parking as a public benefit.
The other thing we have to think about too is we need parking, but everyone also complains about congestion too. So the more parking you build, the more cars are going to be here, and the more complaints about congestion we'll have also.
Okay, so we saw this slide before, but it's kind of to summarize where we are, which is that we've got to move that number down. And so what we try to do on the next slide is give a sense of what is a first step that we could take to start reducing this number. There's probably still going to be some work that we need to do next month. Ideally we could get down to 12 million tonight, but I don't. I think that it might be hard to do that. But on the next slide, Lou's ready to cut. But the sort of message here is that if we can make some movement downward tonight, that puts us in a better position next month. We've got some work to do to fill in some details, find out a little bit more about some of these projects, public and private.
And before we get to the fund cutting slide, I would just also say that if projects are cut tonight, then we don't have to fill in the details on those projects, which means that we can spend more time on projects that will be in the plan. So.
And follow up on that as well. It's also less that goes into the public survey. It's more makes for a more targeted survey, more targeted final public workshop as well. So, and again, this is us sort of as Euro consultants being the bad guy. It's part of our role sometime. But here's what we thought. This is our first pass. You heard us sort of talk about all of these projects tonight. These are the ones that we thought maybe didn't clear that first bar that Susan talked about. Maybe they're not quite ready to go. Maybe they're not quite transformative. Maybe some pieces of it are ineligible. As we've talked about, maybe there are some other funding sources that we can turn to for some of these. But what we'd like to do is, hear from you, all of you. First of all, do you disagree about any of these? Are there any of these that you want to keep around? If so, let's talk about that. If there's sort of general consensus, then I think we should record that and move on. Any?
I feel strongly we need transportation. Somehow we have to figure this out because it's such a killing to bring people who don't want to walk or can't walk downtown. So to take the necessary steps, I would be willing to give up.
You're talking about 2D?
No, keeping that in the steps, the long steps.
But that's on the next page.
Anyway, I think that's somehow, if we can, transportation is such a key thing. When we did the free trolley a couple years ago, it really made a difference in getting people from the train station downtown, and it was, it was a.
I think if this was a company saying, hey, we need this stuff to put in the physical infrastructure, that we would do it.
It's just having to figure out how we can.
But this making an app with the DRI.
No, I know.
Right, but I think it also requires some more backup, is what you said before, so that if they can find that backup.
So now you need a sponsor? Like, what do we need to make this work? This way, can we work backwards? If I would need this, this, and this to make it work. If there's anything.
I think we probably need to reshuffle, on RIDE particularly, I think we need to reshuffle what the DRI funds are going toward, and there's not enough capital to cover the amount of DRI that they're asking, so that means we also need some other funding sources to cover the part that is critical and important, but not fundable under DRI. So the sort of two things is that we can move the money around, but we've got to find some other money as well to fill in the gap that creates.
And by we, I mean the project sponsor, who we actually haven't heard from in a week or two. So we can follow up with them tomorrow, but they were supposed to give more information to us this week, last week, and we haven't heard. So I don't know what that means, but we can follow up. There's just a lot of questions here, is the problem.
Would this be eligible for the CFA?
Conceivably, there's a question that we have out to ESD about whether they would fund a mobile app through a different program, and we haven't gotten a firm answer on that yet. So there's a possibility that it could get funded with state funds from other sources. I mentioned also that there's the truck voucher incentive program, which is another source that could be used to fund the rolling stock itself. So.
Aren't there companies that have, just in New Shell, they have electric shuttles, and that company, I know knows them in more than just New Shell, and there's an app if you want to get a ride.
So that's this is not specifically the question that you're asking, but that's funded by all the sort of new development that's happening there. It's privately funded, and it's free to users.
No, I know that, I'm funding it.
Yeah.
That's not what I meant, but I meant, I don't think you need to create the app from whole cloth. I think this company, yes, but I think there are other companies. If it isn't this, I totally agree with Louis saying, 10 years from now, Peekskill doesn't have solved this problem, there's going to be this Peekskill. If we get it done now, it'll jumpstart everything, which is why it's a good idea. Maybe just not this this version of it, where you have to spend $500,000 to pay software. I just think that seems ridiculous to me.
You know, the thing that struck us about this project from the beginning is that it makes sense not just for Peekskill, but for a lot of communities up and down this side, of the Hudson that deal with similar issues of topography. I mean, Ossining is one, for example, Croton also. This is maybe a bigger project, and maybe the county needs to be involved in doing some kind of a really coordinated study that involves multiple communities. It's bigger than DRI if you're looking at it from that perspective, and needs a little bit more time and a little bit more study. So there's probably opportunity from that angle, but it's not really going to fit into the DRI timeline.
But from the question of is this CFA eligible? If this were not an app, if it was a system that didn't have an app that had to be developed, like a turnkey system that if it's funded, it works, and it's got a approved track record, then it probably is CFA eligible, right?
I think it again goes back to what's getting funded. Right, and if what's getting funded is the trolleys and the bikes, what is the other thing that Dave didn't mention before, which is a question here, is let's say the sponsor is a private entity and they own the trolley, and it doesn't work after a couple of years. They can leave town and take that trolley somewhere else, and that's great for them, and it's great for the investment, right? But it's not great for Peekskill, right? So the trolley's So let's say that the city owns the rolling stock, and it doesn't work after a couple of years. Now the city owns a trolley and some bikes. Is the city going to run a trolley service?
Nourish Health is they're leasing the equipment. They're not buying it. I don't know, is that eligible?
That's probably not eligible. It's not eligible for DRI.
How can it not work? A transportation system downtown, we're going to have Fleischman's Pier open, we're going to have all these places where people are going to come to the train, Fleischman's Pier. How could it not work bringing people around Peekskill? It just doesn't make any sense. So if the city owned it and had a private operator who's already in the business doing it, it doesn't make sense. We can't figure this out. And like I say, we don't need a gap, but there's got to be a way, because it's only going to get more and more tourism coming to Peekskill.
I'm not sure if there's a solution here, but other cities that are big in tourism use shuttle service. They're privately owned shuttle services that make money transporting people, and there's a fee either to the person who's hiring them for the group, or the group people in the group themselves pay a small fee.
So I get the value of cutting projects and then focusing in, but is this a case where there's a lot of support for this concept? Maybe it makes sense to not cut it yet and let the details sort of emerge a little more and show that community support in case there's other funding routes available?
It's up to you as a committee, and you're perfectly free to do that. I am not 100% sure that we're going to nail down these details in the next 6 weeks.
Right.
I'm just going to say that.
But it's one of, what, 5 up here, so.
If you want to keep it in for now, we can, and we will keep digging. I'm just going to say that I think it's unlikely that we will be able to solve these problems in the next 6 weeks.
I mean, I can imagine spending $525,000 to solve the transportation problem. This isn't it. I think we're in agreement in that. It requires somebody stepping up, which is something we need more of in Peekskill, people starting new businesses, having that that privilege to step away from their job and take all those risks. Right. I could imagine us, a business getting started with this amount of money, where they buy, 1,500 e-bikes or e-scooters, and set up charging stations, and then have one person who every day spends 2 hours going and redistributing them and stuff like that. Or having somebody start a dollar, like in the city they have dollar vans, where individuals privately buy these relatively busted up old vans, keep them going, and you pay $1, and you kind of take everybody where they need to go. But that requires an entrepreneurship that we would have to foster right now to get somebody to throw this together so that we get it done.
And this could certainly be supported for other funding. I mean, I think in some way it should stay in the plan in that sense, if for no other reason. But it's up to you as a committee.
For other funding.
Sounds like we're saying is we're going to get rid of it before this gets submitted to the state, but we want to keep it in until next, so it stays at the top of people's mind. That's all it really sounds like we're saying.
Or do we want to add $500K to the general fund, thinking that we want to use that later to solve the transportation problem?
So.
What general fund are you talking about?
The $600K.
I think it's still would be on.
Yeah.
To keep it simple, if we were able to purchase some kind of trolley system, a trolley, and the city would own it, however it would be, so they own it, could a private company come in and say, I'll run the trolley and I'll take care of the maintenance and I'll take care of that stuff? Would that be considered DRI funding?
I think DRI funds going toward the equipment, if the city owns it, is better, preferable in the state's mind than a private entity that might, if the private entity doesn't work out and they take the rolling stock somewhere else, then the benefit's not going to Peekskill.
So,
if the city owns it, the challenge then is how to make sure that that's a sustainable business.
now, I'm thinking about you, Leslie, would that be something your company would be interested in? If they got a trolley specific for tourism, would your company be interested in running that?
Well, I'd be interested for sure, but I kind of agree with them that right now this isn't ready for DRI. But I would not take it off the list today. I would see if we can rework it some way.
Councilman France.
Yes, I would like to say something about that, because I would, as you know, we talking a lot of things about that. I would like you keep it that for the transportation and in mind, that don't take it away, because
thank you. There's something like, and I follow when I did the request only for the Untitled Chapter, all that communication that we have back and forward. I mean, I was trying to focus on the DRI map, but there was a lot of communication that we need to combine a lot of government agencies. I mean, when we talk with you as a state, when we talk with us as a city, and the planning, the city manager, the mayor, and the common council, but we need maybe to include in that communication not only the transportation planning for the county, but even the head for the county, the county secretary, and maybe put them together and bring one idea. If we're talking about the sustainable, if we can combine that thing for the B-line system and improve, that's one of the requests that we did like a year and a half. Changing the local route they have only for commuter to the train, but only in the weekends, in the weekdays, and early, and they don't have nothing in the nighttime. Maybe we can find something that we can combine with private investor for the trolley, and maybe, I don't know how they can work it. We need to maybe move some chairs. The city manager is here, is new. I don't want to get involved, but I know the planning department is working to request some kind of the study and improve the transportation system in the city. So that could be maybe more sustainable if we can combine with the B-line and maybe private. It's hard to gather that thing, but I think we need to put many people together. And I usually talk in the common concept to do that, maybe like a task force and focus on that thing, because the city needed for business in the nighttime to move it from the train station, but the residents of the city needed a lot of transportation. So how can you be really economy, and you know, the fees could be no higher for the resident to move from one point to another, maybe doing transfer for another route. I mean, that's my point. I mean, I think we can do that, but we need to combine a couple of people to talk about that. I mean, it has to be the city manager, the planning department, business owner who are supporting that thing, and counting in the DRI. So, but I don't know how can that work in this short time that we have. So that's my point. But I think we can try to do it. Even you just mentioned sometimes like for another step, for another time to do something in another way, because we need to improve the transportation in the city. Okay.
So I think we'll, go ahead.
Would we be able to add some projects to cut? Like if I could suggest the 100 Step or the Peekskill Museum?
We are more than open to additional.
I'd like to also see potentially taking out the farmer's market structure until the public session, because I know she's working on some current funding. So just give her a little bit more time, and if it, if it doesn't pan out, we can look at it that way. That would be my suggestion.
I second that motion.
On the
5C.
on the 100 steps.
You want to vote on the 100 steps? All those in favor of removing the 100 steps project from DRI?
All right, cool.
Anybody opposed? Okay.
I was voting for Marcia.
Well, why don't we go through these? So, all those in favor of dropping the high-speed internet 1A from DRI? Anybody opposed?
That's the one we already had, right?
It's on this list 1A. Any opposed? I'm sensing we want to keep the trolley for now. Everybody in favor of that?
Yes.
Even if we cut,
With a replacement.
even if we cut the budget in half or something, just got to
We'll work on it with them.
Where if we had the equipment, we can get someone to operate it and make it.
We'll follow up.
Just to be clear about the trolley, just so we don't spend a lot of time the next meeting on it. In order for the state to fund it or award it, there needs to be a project sponsor who otherwise has the full program to do it. And
The Lancet Trolley Service, you ever
I did it once.
It's in no way to diminish the need. It's been a clearly articulated need from day one, and we sort of worked very hard to identify a sponsor and try this in different ways. It's a tough nut to crack, as I think you're all sort of saying. So just understand that it has to be a fully formed project that's implementable, that can be funded to an identified entity, and that has to happen by the next couple of weeks.
Okay, got it.
So lose on it.
Okay, so that'll stay for.
I have the LLC go Peekskill. Give it to you.
Coffee house roaster, all those in favor of dropping this from the list? Any opposition? Any no's? Okay. There's a suggestion to keep the farmer's market structure in for the time being. I guess let the public weigh in on it, and she can seek alternative funding.
I think she's working on funding, but I would just ask that you give her a little bit more time.
All those in favor?
All those in favor.
Of keeping the farmer's market structure on the list. Until the next meeting. Anybody opposed? Got two opposed. 3 opposed. There's more than that, okay. So that will remain until at least the next meeting. The last one, renovation of 982 and 1022 Main Street and the adjacent parking lot. Anybody in favor of dropping this one from the list?
Dropping it?
Dropping it. Anybody opposed to dropping it?
You get 6 votes.
All right, so to be clear on the outcome of this slide, the farmer's market structure and the trolley would remain on the overall list until at least the next LPC meeting, and they will be in the survey.
So in the survey, do you expand on the challenges of making it eligible? Because like the farmer's market, in a perfect world, every city should have a farmer's market that's got a permanent structure, et cetera. That's not why this is a bad idea. It's not a bad idea because this one isn't feasible. So if you sort of make that, it'll just make it easier for when we come back 6 weeks from now and have this conversation. Similarly, the trolley, well, it's a great idea. It's not eligible. So do you give public the opportunity to tell us?
Yeah, we can, you know, we need to provide more information than just the pros and cons that we've done tonight. But we can include something like that, you know, on the projects as well to clarify, you know, eligibility and other funding sources and that sort of thing.
So I spoke to Corinne about the farmer's market. She asked me if I was supporting. I said I believe that the farmer's market should be like downtown underneath the highway on Water Street. And she goes, it doesn't serve the downtown community because they can't get to it. But if we have a trolley, we'll get them to it.
It's also sponsored by the bid, which can't do it down at the waterfront.
There's a way to get the big waterfront.
So the next group here were projects that you know we thought you know could be eligible. They could make that first screen, but we weren't sure about sort of other questions about them. So 5C we've already talked about. These are ones where I think, as we mentioned as we were going through the slides tonight, we're still following up. So these weren't ones that we were going to push for us tonight. Although we made a decision on 5C, but we're gonna keep digging on the rest of these.
So next,
Unless anybody has any strong feelings about any of these.
so what I was going to ask, should we, if there are any strong feelings about removing any of them, should we do that tonight or?
Well, if there are other projects that we haven't kind of put on the table that you all are, you know, can find some consensus about, it would help all of our work both in the next month and also at the next meeting. So,
So the only one right now is just the 100 steps.
4 steps.
Okay. That's fair enough for me.
Sure.
One is, are you expecting more information from the field library, and when do you expect it?
In the next probably week or two. Yeah. But yes, we are expecting more information from this. They're working on conceptual drawings. Yeah. Probably, I wouldn't expect a rendering necessarily, but at least conceptual floor plans.
So they're focusing more like on not expanding, but just like fixing up.
No, it's an expansion. It's an expansion. Yeah.
What about the newer projects that we haven't really discussed except for today, that we were gonna put some of those into other projects? We want to try to get through some of those, or safe steps for all.
Yeah, I mean,
You want
unless
to cut
there's,
those as initiatives, or do you want to just?
I mean, unless there's objection, our sense was that we sort of laid out what our, what the path was for that. Safe steps for all is streetscape improvements. It wouldn't make sense as a standalone project. So we've got, we have those other projects in the plan already.
Do you want to do an actual vote on there were two of those that we did not recommend, the Peekskill Museum and the restroom on Central Avenue. It's probably worth doing an actual vote on those. I'll take a vote on cutting the restroom on Central Avenue from the list. Any opposed? Anybody want to keep that? Okay, so that one is not on the list. And the Peekskill Museum improvements to their actual building. I'll take a motion or a vote to remove that from the list. Okay. This is removing the Peekskill Museum project from the list. Yeah, the one that was the air conditioning, the porch, and the driveway. How many did we get? 9. Anybody opposed from removing that from the list? They want to keep it. Okay, so that would remove it from the list. Do I have general support for keeping it as a recommended for other funding in the plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so next steps. One more slide. So we're gonna keep revising all these projects, right? Keep updating them. We've been providing those project profiles to you at every meeting. You've got a sense that those are sort of constantly moving targets. We didn't provide a hard copy of those for everyone tonight. We got a message from a few of you that wasn't necessary. We did bring a handful of hard copies, so if anyone wants one, we've got a couple of them here. So feel free to take those. The public survey is going to go live on Friday. Right, so we've already started putting that into SurveyMonkey, so that's going to be ready to go by the end of the day on Friday. We'll send out some language that you all can use to help us promote that on social media. We're going to send out an e-blast this week as well to the list that we've been developing. The next public workshop is February 26th, back at the firehouse. Great space. We're very excited about having another event there. And our next and last LPC meeting is here on March 18th.
So on March 18th, do we all winnow it down to the final number? We all vote?
Yeah, so I think, you read my mind because I was going to touch on that. I think the way we envision it is we'll come in with a recommended slate. It's only our recommendation, but we will recommend to you which projects should be in or off. We can have some discussion. If you all have consensus that, we're not right on that recommendation, we can add or subtract, and we'll come to an agreement at the meeting, and then we'll have a final vote by all of you on that slate.
Is there any voting in absentia if one cannot make that meeting?
Proxies?
Proxy?
I'll be done with that.
All right. We'll
Yeah, I'm sure that we can work that out, yes.
Yeah, on an individual basis.
We don't want two people to show up and, that's not that.
I just,
I want to throw out a notion, all depending on sort of what happens between now and the final meeting, I would just leave open the possibility of having perhaps a sort of a work session prior to the actual meeting. So there might be a need to come at 6 or 5 or something, so that we have some time to talk through some of the details that are still open, depending on what the consultant team can nail down, so that we can actually have a meeting that's during our regular meeting time, that the public can see what the final outcome is and be transparent about that.
And we'll work on getting you the results of the survey before that meeting in advance, so that you can see how the public weighed in.
You guys have done a great job.
Thanks to everybody who stayed. And anybody from the public, you're hearty souls. Anybody have any comments or questions?
Are we committing to a work session before the next meeting?
No, 18.
Yeah, so we'll confirm that, but I think that's a good idea.
Really detailed.
right, thank you all for being here. Wait, one more question. Hold on, one question, everybody.
Hi, I'm Frederick Denson. I'm working with the RIDE shuttle and that whole program. And I would just, one thing we've been talking to you guys about, I think, is about the idea and we've actually had a talk with the developer today, and we have revised our ask for the app. It's actually quite significantly lower, but the larger thing is that you say the technology element isn't considered infrastructure, but we really believe that it's, you know, the smart cities, smart growth, and the app layer is, you know, the new infrastructure, and it's worth investing in. And we, you know, obviously there was a lot of debate here about whether to keep it in or not, but we wonder if there's enough support, and if we get everything in order, is there any possibility to argue that to the state that you know, if we don't invest in this type of new layer of smart technology for cities as a new form of infrastructure, that there, you know, the state is leaving behind? It's like, you know, investing in the horse and buggy when the car is, you know, going to be changing the whole nature of infrastructure. And you know, is there a way to try to pitch that, or do you think that's just a waste?
Yeah, I don't think that it's that that we or the folks at the state don't understand the sort of changing nature of the industry and the need for this type of technology. It's about funding it through this program in particular. Right. But we can have that conversation, you know, sort of again in the short term. But if that's the message that we get, that's sort of going to be the message if the project is in the plan when it goes up to the state later on.
Right. So from your knowledge of the program, there's no it's very much brick and mortar infrastructure, and that it would be very hard to convince otherwise.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Dave, I don't know if you want to.
I would just say, you know, the opportunity to articulate the opportunity is in the project profile. So, you know, there's still a number of open questions. That's the place to make that argument. Right. So if you can make that, you know, to the best of your ability, and the committee wants to leave it in the plan, then that's the way it will come to the state, and that's the information the state will use to make a decision. But right. But certainly understand that, you know, it's viewed as a capital program, and an app is not viewed as a capital expense.
Right. All right, great. Thank you very much.
I'll take it.
All right. Thank you, everyone.